What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the Awesemo.com Deeper Dive. This is no joke. This is 13 games, second day of the season, and we're diving right into it. No time to waste. I'm Dave Loughran on Twitter at Lafayette_D. Hit me up. Give me a follow. And, of course, Adam Scherer, my usual Deeper Dive co-host at ShipMyMoney DFS. Hit the man up as well. We're happy to have all of you guys with us. First things first, hit that subscribe button. Help us get to 50K. We just hit 45,000. This is big business here. Things are happening, and we're almost there. Thanks to you guys with the NBA season upon us. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Hit that subscribe so you always know when we go live. We'll show up in your recommended feed, in your browse feature, all of that good stuff. And to start the show off, hit that thumbs up. Get us up there. Make something happen. Adam, 13 games. We only got an hour to make this happen. Fortunately, we got a live before lock afterwards. So 2 straight hours of content should put us in good position.
Yeah, for sure. Full full slate of the season should be a good time. Already got plenty of, NBA news that we're waiting on.
You think the Houston game is going to get canceled?
No. I guess it could because they have to have 8 active players.
Well, that's the crazy thing, right? Because this seems like March basketball.
It's ridiculous that we're doing this the first night of the season.
I hate it. I love that we're here, but I hate it. You ready to just dive into this? We got about we got about an hour, 58 minutes. It's time for me to stop talking and start it off with Charlotte and Cleveland. One of the lesser appealing games from an overall viewing perspective on this slate, but with Kevin Love absent, there might be some interesting pieces. The Hornets 2.5-point favorites on the road, and I think we'll figure out how much home road splits mean, if they mean anything, Adam, with no fans in attendance, because everything else was in a bubble since this COVID thing happened. 217.5 total. Let's kick it off with the Charlotte Hornets, wherever you'd like to go.
Yeah, you mentioned this not being a really appealing game from a viewing standpoint. It's not the most appealing game from a DFS standpoint either when you consider the full size of the slate. Charlotte, though, I think there is pretty big pricing discrepancies between sites. On DraftKings, there's nothing in particular that really stands out to me. $4,200 PJ Washington is probably the most appealing play here, but with there being 13 games and tons of value, it's not something that I'm really in love with. But on the FanDuel side, you have Terry Rozier at 4,600. You have Devontae Graham at 5,700. Again, tons of plays on this slate. Nothing is really a must play, and certainly not these guys. But they're, I think, very clearly underpriced for what should be 30-plus minutes from these guys. Even if they do take a bit of a step back from last season, playing alongside Gordon Hayward, we know that the plan is for Devontae Graham to lose usage this year, and that comes from James Borrego. They're still really cheap on FanDuel.
You remember Devontae Graham got off to that torrid start last season, and then it all just kind of began to evaporate. The end of the year, he actually looked really solid, but the guy needed monster minutes to get there. Terry Rozier is a solid enough player, but he's much better as a backup that could fulfill the duties when a starter was out in Boston. Don't get me wrong, he's not bad, but from a fantasy standpoint, is he stellar? No. And Gordon Hayward, he's got that fractured pinky finger on his shooting hand, and he's 6,600. I guess the biggest question here is there anything you really like on the Charlotte side?
No, not when you start comparing to other games that we'll get to later. Like I said, I think that the pricing is very clearly too cheap on Rozier and Graham on FanDuel, and the price on PJ Washington, who should get some backup center minutes, is a little cheap on DraftKings. But in terms of priorities and getting in the cash lineups, I don't really see it. If you're getting to them in tournaments, I think that's fine.
I don't anticipate this game being played at the most elevated pace, but we know that when Kevin Love is out, Larry Nance has been pretty productive over the years. And now that you have no Tristan Thompson, it could get a little bit more interesting at that. Now, of course, you have an elite, really the world's best rebounder in Andre Drummond, vacuuming everything off the glass at center for Cleveland. But I want to start with Larry Nance here, who is expected to make the start with Kevin Love sideline at 5,900 on DraftKings specifically. I'll get some FanDuel pricing mixed in as well. Is he viable for you today?
He's viable. He's not really my favorite guy, though. And the reason is that, you have Andre Drummond here, which Nance played 72 minutes alongside Drummond last year. He actually averaged 1.33 FanDuel points per minute. But if you look at the bigger sample that he had with Tristan Thompson, where he played 459 minutes alongside him, he only averaged 0.77 fantasy points per minute. And I expect the true answer is probably somewhere between those two numbers, but I think it's probably a lot closer to 0.77 than 1.33 playing alongside Drummond, since Drummond is going to grab so many rebounds, and it's not like Nance is a really high usage player. But the other thing that makes me not really super excited about Nance here is that the Cavs brought in JaVale McGee in the offseason. So I don't think you're going to get like Nance starting alongside Drummond and then having his minutes staggered so he's playing the backup center. I think JaVale McGee is going to be the backup center, and you're basically going to be having Larry Nance just having rebounds taken by Drummond and McGee all game long. So it's tough to really prioritize him at 5,900 on DraftKings. I do think he looks better on FanDuel, where he's a $5,100 small forward. Don't ask me how he's a small forward, but he is. So, I think that he's a much better play there than he is on DraftKings at almost $6,000.
So, Adam, last year, Drummond played only 8 games with Cleveland before his season in the Cleveland Cavaliers was prematurely ended. He had a career high, of course, small sample, but there's a lot you can kind of pull from this. Career high 28.7% usage rate, 22% rebound rate, which I would only anticipate climbing given what we've seen from him in the past, and was even dishing out assists at a double-digit clip. But I think people ignore the fact, and I try and emphasize this a lot, although no one needs any convincing to play Andre Drummond. He is a quality shot blocker and a quality enough ball swiper to the point where his per game numbers every year, he averages above or around or above 1.5 steals and blocks per game.
Yeah, he puts up those defensive stats. You always notice it on days where he's popular and you don't play him, because you'll kind of look and be like, oh, Drummond, he has 10 and 8. Like that's fine. And then it's like, oh, he also has 4 blocks and 3 steals, and I can't win without him.
In the first quarter. Yeah,
exactly. So you kind of notice that even though you don't think of him as a shot blocker or as like a great defender, you do notice those stats whenever you don't play him. And I think today he comes in as one of the better center options on the slate. He's just underpriced across the board, really. $8,400 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's I think 8K, going off the top of my head.
Yeah, he's 8K.
Yeah, 8K. So I mean, you're expecting 32, 33, if not more minutes from him. He should be really productive here. Should grab a ton of rebounds. Kevin Love being out, small sample, like you said, last season, but the rebounding numbers for Drummond increased when he was playing without Love, which is what you would expect to happen. I don't expect Larry Nance to be taking rebounds from Drummond like Kevin Love potentially would. So I think Drummond just looks great here. It's the Charlotte front court that he should be able to have success against. They're not going to do much to defend him in the paint. Everything looks really good for Drummond.
You have anything else here for Cleveland that you like, or anything in this game before we move on?
Not really. That's priorities. Drummond really the only true priority for me from this game.
New York Knicks, Indiana Pacers, 215.5 total. So 2 to kick it off that really aren't that high. Pacers laying 7.5 points at home, 111.5 point total. The New York side of the ball with a new look, Tom Thibodeau. If there's one thing we know about this man, is that he is always going to run his starters into the ground, particularly his vets. We've seen it happen time and time again. Does that do anything for you today, looking at this team and saying, all right, you know what? They're not good. They're not going to be particularly good, but maybe there's a couple things that we can take away from them, assuming they play solid enough minutes at their price points, they make sense.
It doesn't do a whole lot for me today specifically, because I think the guy that's most going to benefit this season is Julius Randle. But you'll see as we go through the show, there's this range of power forward / center guys in the mid 7Ks that is just phenomenal, and I think just better than Randle. So even though I do think you get a lot of minutes from the starters and from Randle in particular, it's still really hard to prioritize them here when Knicks come in with the lowest team total on the slate. If I were going to the Knicks, I think that on FanDuel at 4,200, you have Alec Burks probably playing around 28 minutes. He's actually around a fantasy point per minute guy last season. And, even though it is a pretty unappealing game, that's a decent value there. We also just got Knicks news that Mitchell Robinson is expected to start at center, assuming he plays. That does take one potential value play away in Nerlens Noel, who is a $3,900 power forward on FanDuel, $3,600 on DraftKings. If he's going back to the bench and losing a few minutes there, it definitely takes value away from him. And then Robinson at 5,200 is viable, but the opportunity cost at center on this slate is through the roof. And there's a ton of value elsewhere to where I'm not sure I really want to be going to Robinson and, hoping to get 30 or 35 points all that often.
Well, and hoping he doesn't foul out in the first quarter.
Right, exactly.
And I say that somewhat in jest, but not really. I've been a Robinson truther from the jump. I like Mitchell Robinson. He averaged 1.07 fantasy points per minute last season. But But, he also averages north of 5.3 personal fouls per 36. That scares me. On the flip side of this game, and like you said, Alec Burks, if you wanted to look there, it makes sense if you're just throwing darts at a cheap price point. The Pacer side of the ball, we were actually talking about it prior to the show with our producer, Jordan Klein, who's jumping in some of these tiers contests. Domantas Sabonis, $7,400 against the Knicks. How much do you like this spot?
I think it's a good spot. It's really just how much of him can you get to when you start comparing him to some of these other power forwards that we'll talk about. But I think he is one of the really good ones. This guy produces at a really high rate whenever he's on the floor. Going up against the Knicks obviously isn't a bad matchup for him. He's affordably priced at $7,400, has multi-position eligibility on DraftKings. I like Sabonis a lot. He's getting, if I just crunch like my top projected lineups, he's getting into, like 1 out of every 10. And then, in tournaments, I think the ownership should be low enough on a 13-game slate that he's a good play there. So Sabonis does look like a good option, I think. Definitely my favorite guy from the Indiana side.
There's no way we're getting through 13 games. We're going to try. We're going to do our best. If we miss it, the live before lock row will be sure to help out. But look, we're trying. I hate giving I don't like giving bad information, Adam, where you have like 13 seconds on each player. But I think. And
to be fair, there are games that we can do that on where there's like one guy we're talking about.
Yeah, okay. We'll hit on the players we really like, and if there's a couple that we think make sense as well as maybe low on like tournament values, then we'll talk about them too. Plus, I'm not particularly good at brevity, so
yeah. And also for anyone that has questions about a player they think we missed, I wrote a game by game breakdown in the deep dive article. It took me like 5.5 hours to write, so they're probably mentioned in there.
It's probably the longest daily fantasy article ever written.
It's basically an NFL style matchups article, but on a 13-game basketball slate.
It's incredible. He got everything done and then forgot that he missed an entire game.
Yeah, I built my lineup, got DeJounte Murray, and said, I don't remember writing about him.
It's awesome, though, and it's finally in front of the paywall. It's totally free. It's the deep dive. Check it out. Kind of a companion piece to this. Outside of Domantas Sabonis, you've got guys like Miles Turner. As a rebounder, he's just pedestrian given, today's league. And he does a few things well, but nothing great. Kind of a jack of all trades to some extent, but just not a master of any. Victor Oladipo didn't show us enough last season, coming back from a myriad injuries. And then Malcolm Brogdon was solid, but this team is finally getting entirely healthy. So you have to wonder, what's his involvement going to look like? What's his usage going to look like with Oladipo and Sabonis back at full strength?
Yeah, I mean, this team, there's a bunch of teams on this slate where it's like, they're really good, but they're mostly healthy and the pricing's efficient. I think that Indiana is pretty much one of those teams, with the exception of Sabonis being a little underpriced. And Brogdon's like a decent value, but again, there's a million guards on this slate, and there's a million centers that look good. And then there's a ton of like semi-expensive power forwards that look really good. So the opportunity cost of point guard is really high, and it just makes it tough, I think, to get to Brogdon. And then beyond that, like, I'm not going to TJ Warren on this slate. I can't go to Miles Turner on this slate. There's just too many centers I like more.
Feels like forever ago that TJ Warren went on such a heater that no one knew what to do with him.
I think some people are still convinced that he's like a brand new player.
$5,800 though, with the whole team healthy, like you're saying, it's just not worth it to you today on a 13 gamer, right?
Yeah, I just can't get there.
All right, you ready to move on?
Yeah, we did just get Cleveland news. Isaac Okoro is starting for Cleveland tonight. That was expected. He's really cheap. If you need value in tournaments, he's fine, but there's better value.
How many minutes are you projecting him for? I know how tough it is early in the year.
I think he gets 30 plus. He was playing 30 in the preseason.
Okay. Miami, Orlando. Let's move to this one. So the first two had totals sub 218. It's 217, 215 and a half. Now we got 217 and a half. The Heat amazingly made it to the finals. Jimmy Butler went wild inside the bubble in that postseason run. Credit to them, but they had no chance. 5-point favorites still against what many might call an upstart Orlando team. Not expected to be the highest scoring affair, Adam, and there are a lot of really good games on this slate. So this one might not be one that you're super enticed by, but we'll start with Miami on the road, 5-point favorites.
Yeah, this is definitely one that I think we can touch on pretty quickly. Two solid defensive teams. should be a relatively slow-paced game. Bam Adebayo, I think, is a little underpriced. He's 7,300 on DraftKings, but he's only center eligible, which does really make a difference on this slate because you kind of want to roster as many centers as you can. He looks the best to me. Beyond that, you just have another fully healthy team where, like, you don't need me to tell you Jimmy Butler's capable of having a good game, but do I think he's particularly likely compared to other players on this slate? I don't really think so. So Bam, I think, looks the best. If you want to gamble on a $7,700 Jimmy Butler, that's fine. If you want to gamble on the minutes for a $4,100 Kendrick Nunn on FanDuel, it's okay, but just nothing close to priorities for me. Again, Bam looks the best, and even he is just a secondary play.
Okay. I'm trying to pay close attention to news and notes here in case we get anything on this Houston OKC game. We did just get the Magic starting lineup: Fultz, Fournier, Bacon, Gordon, and Vucevic. Once in a while, we get lucky like that, Adam. And the moment we go to that team, we get the starting lineup. So Orlando on the opposite side of this one. Anything you like here?
I like the price tag on Markelle Fultz at $5K on DraftKings. I hate that it's on this 13, maybe about to be 12, but 13 game slate. I can't say plug in Markelle Fultz. It's going to be great at 5K against Miami. If this were like a 6 game slate, he'd be a good value. He projects for like 5.5 to 6X, which normally is going to be really good. He's someone that I'm high on this year. I think he gets 30 plus minutes. He averaged just shy of a fantasy point per minute last year. That being said, there's a lot of really cheap guards that we can use for value. There's a lot of expensive guards on the slate that I want to pay up for. Fultz kind of just gets pushed out. Vooch, I think, is also a good play here. Miami's a solid team defensively, but it typically just doesn't really matter for Vooch. If you go back and look at previous matchups here, he's averaged right around the same fantasy points per minute as he has overall, which is like 1.31 DraftKings points per minute. He's a good play. He's definitely at the top of the center tier, or top of the center options for me, but I still think like Drummond's a little bit higher up on that tier. So it's one of the best center plays, just not the best, I don't think, in Vooch.
Yeah, and Vooch, you'd be paying even $100 more than Drummond on FanDuel. So yeah. I think that's a little bit difficult as well. Top plays from this game, if anything. I know you said it's one that's pretty easy to breeze by.
Yeah, no like top plays over the whole slate for me, but the top plays from this game would be Vooch and Fultz from the Orlando side and Bam from the Miami side.
All right, Philadelphia and Washington. Again, and I may have forgot to mention it at the top of the show, ownership is important for all of these slates. There's no doubt, Adam, but I definitely think you have to be looking at it in a different context than you were yesterday on a 2-game slate.
Yeah, the raw ownership is just going to be so different. Like Russell Westbrook's the perfect example of it on the Washington side of this game. I think he's one of the best tournament plays if you're really focusing on ownership, because I think he's not going to be as highly owned as he should be. But on a slate this big, you're talking about the difference between like 4% and 7% owned, and it just doesn't really matter that much. So you can definitely just kind of focus more on rostering what you think the best plays are than worrying about ownership.
Miles Turner and TJ Warren are both confirmed active tonight. Washington and Philly, the 76ers, you want to talk about a new look basketball team. They got rid of Al Horford, who we're going to talk about later in the show, whether you want to or not. They got rid of Josh Richardson. They brought in a pure shooting 3-point guy in Seth Curry, and looking to change things up a little bit. Daryl Morey brought him in. I think they're trending in the right direction. As a Philadelphia fan, I'm happy with what they managed to do, even if they didn't make any huge splashes. They're 7-point favorites, and this game has a 230.5 total. Adam, their 118.75 implied total is easily the highest that we've talked about thus far. But we're going to start it off with the road team in Washington, your team, talking Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal, who is always going to come close to leading the league in minutes, or at least he has under Scott Brooks. But alongside Russell Westbrook now, what type of hit does his usage take? Last season, he didn't have to worry about John Wall bringing the ball up the court. This season, entirely different scenario alongside Westbrook.
Yeah, I mean, my expectation for Beal is that his efficiency improves, but his usage comes down. I think you'll still see a really high upside player, but probably not quite the same fantasy performances that you did last year, where for a while it got to the point where you just kind of had to play him every slate. But overall, I think that he's still someone that is going to be a good tournament play whenever he's low owned, just because he does still have that ceiling. On a 13-game slate, though, I think it's going to be really, really difficult to get there. If I'm going to anything from Washington, at the top end, at least, I think it is Westbrook, just because I think this offense suits him really, really well. Washington can space the floor. They have Avdija that they just drafted. They have Bertans, who's one of the best three-point shooters in the league. But not talked about really at all is that Thomas Bryant is a capable three-point shooter. He's someone that can get out from under the basket. And you saw how good Westbrook was after Houston got rid of Capella last year. Bryant's a center, but he doesn't need to hang around the rim. He can knock down threes. He shot like 40% last year. And then this preseason, he's averaged 7 3-pointers per 36 minutes. So it seems like that's definitely something that they're focusing on. I think Westbrook has the potential to be very, very good on this Washington offense. And it's definitely a spot where I'd like to jump on it before everyone realizes that he's going to be really good on this Washington offense. The problem you're just going to run into still is the opportunity cost on this slate. Like, he has to beat Damian Lillard. He has to beat Trae Young. He has to beat so many guys. So I do think he's a very, very good tournament play. I'll be very happy if I do end up with him in tournament lineups. But that being said, like, I'm not going to say that any one player is any sort of a lock on a 13-game slate.
He's one of 10 players on DraftKings priced above 9,000. And man, there's a lot of competition, like you said, to be the guy that gets the job done at that salary. It's not just like you're deciding between him and Lillard. You said it. There's a lot. Trae Young's going up against the Chicago Bulls. I don't need to get into it any further. It's a tough decision to make. So the question I'd ask you is it still something that you're interested in? Not just a guy that you think could play well, but in tournaments, is this a spot that you could see yourself getting to at his current ownership?
Yeah, like I could see myself getting there. He grades out well for me. As
3%, by the way, ownership projected right now.
What'd you say, 4%?
3.2.
Yeah. He grades out well in my tournament metric. The thing is just that, like I said, ownership's a little less important on this slate. And it's not even like the Lillard and Young. What really makes it tough is Westbrook is probably a little, or maybe a little underpriced at 9,300. Luka is 10K. Like, Luka's a lot underpriced. And, and so is Giannis at 10-2, like across positions. Point. So you can very easily pay out for multiple players on this slate. It's just that you're going to need Westbrook to beat guys that average like 1.6 DraftKings points per minute.
Pretty egregious price point on Thomas Bryant for DraftKings, north of 7K. Center only eligible on FanDuel at 5,900. It's at least a little bit more palatable, but the Philadelphia 76ers defense last year was supposed to be good, right? They were supposed to have two bigs that could stop Giannis, that could clog up the paint defensively, haul in the boards. And it backfired is an understatement. Everything went wrong. I think they play better this season. They're going to be faster. They're going to be able to space the floor. But I think defensively, you're going to have Joel Embiid as an anchor that's going to give opposing bigs trouble. Do you like anything in the front court today, knowing also that Rui Hachimura is out for at least 3 weeks?
Not particularly. I mean, it's just a massive slate. It's a tough spot for Thomas Bryant. The one other piece from Washington I will point out is more so for FanDuel, but Deni Avdija is $3,500. I'm expecting him to get 28 to 32 minutes. I don't think he'll be a high usage guy playing alongside Beal and Westbrook, but I do think he'll get open shots because, like, why wouldn't he? So I think that he's perfectly fine as a value at small forward. What
about on the Philly side, where you've got Tobias Harris weighing in at a pretty respectable $6,200, Simmons at $87, Joel Embiid at $98. There were a lot of people that wanted to blow this team up, Adam, and some people still want to get rid of Simmons to bring in James Harden. Who knows what's going to happen? But what we do know now is that you're clear 1 through 3 in no specific, well, it is specific order. Shooting, it would be Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, and then Ben Simmons is just going to get enough work as a do-it-all type of point forward that he's always viable. Do you like any of these 3 guys? Do you think Seth Curry is somebody that could have value at a sub 5K price point? What are you doing with the Sixers?
All right, so first things first, we got a little bit more time because Houston is postponed.
They did officially do it, huh?
Yep. Yeah, so we don't have to talk about Al Horford today.
All right, we got an extra 4 minutes.
Yeah. So
I liked Horford, as sick as it sounds.
Yeah, no, I did too. I'm glad not to have to tell everyone else that, though.
Yep.
But until tomorrow, probably. But yeah, I mean, as far as Philly goes, it's a really, really good spot for them. Washington's going to be, I think, one of the most favorable teams to take players against this year. They were one of the fastest teams last year and one of the least efficient defenses. Now you added Russell Westbrook, who is going to push the ball and make them play at a fast pace. I think maybe they play a little bit better defensively this year, just from an effort standpoint, but that's not enough to move you from as bad as they were last year to being any sort sort of competent defense. So I love taking guys against them. The problem you're going to run into today is just that the pricing on Philadelphia is pretty expensive for a slate where you have a lot of underpriced guys. So I think Embiid is going to, he's in a really good spot. I think getting to Embiid is perfectly fine. It's just he's more expensive than Vooch. He's a lot more expensive than Drummond. So I don't think it's the optimal play. Same kind of goes for Simmons, where he's a $9,200 point guard on FanDuel, which is really tough because FanDuel scoring is pretty hard on Simmons, where you lose a full point for turnovers. You don't get double or triple bonuses. DraftKings, he's more appealing, where he has small forward eligibility. He's a little bit cheaper. Washington was one of the worst teams defending in transition last year. Ben Simmons, 14th most points per game in transition in the NBA. So sets up as a good spot for him if you can get to him. I think the guy that looks the best, though, is Tobias Harris at only 6,600 on FanDuel, 6,200 on DraftKings. The guy plays huge minutes. He's over a fantasy point per minute player, and it just sets up as a matchup where he should be able to do really well with these extra possessions. So all three of those guys look really good. I think that Harris probably ends up being the easiest one to get to.
Would you agree the problem with Simmons is similar to Westbrook, just that it's so deep at his position that even if he's in a really, most nights, 6, 7, 8 game slates, we're probably looking at Ben Simmons against Washington and saying he's a top option at his position.
Yeah, for sure. Basically when I wrote the article today, this was one of the first games I did. And it was Simmons against Washington. That's great. That's going to be phenomenal. And then I kind of started looking at other guys and it's it's good. It's just kind of there.
Yeah. Anything else from either side?
Dwight Howard's 3,200 on DraftKings. There's a couple centers on this slate where the opportunity cost is really high, but they're guys that produce at a high rate, and we expect to get 17 or 18 minutes. If for whatever reason they get more, then you're looking at really big games. So not someone I'm banking on or want a lot of money invested in, but I do think that just from a ceiling standpoint, Howard's price tag's a little bit too low.
By the way, according to Shams Charania, James Harden is unavailable due to a violation of the health and safety protocols. 3 Rockets have returned positive or inconclusive coronavirus tests. 4 others are quarantined due to contact tracing. Maybe this is just an intricate plan for him to get out of Houston. And at this point, he's like, they won't trade me. I got fat and they still want me on the team. Now I'm going to spread COVID to the entire organization. No one's going to want me now. Does that make sense?
I mean, even without the COVID part, I think there's a really good chance that he's just okay, they still haven't traded me. I'm going to the strip club every night until they get rid of it. They're either trading me or they're not playing a game because I'm not leaving the strip club.
Right. And it's not a BYOB strip club. He's going there drinking a 6-pack, eating 20 wings and coming back, getting to practice 5 minutes late the next day. Who wants that? I mean, I'll take him in Philly all day long, but you get the point. Milwaukee and Boston, you've got the Milwaukee, but I honestly don't think it's that crazy of an idea, by the way. When you're disgruntled, you do stupid things. 4.5 point favorite.
Ignoring the COVID part, if we had to put a line on, is James Harden just hanging out at the strip club, breaking rules because he wants out of Houston? I think it's probably 50-50.
Yeah. You think it's even money?
Yeah. I think it's 80-20 is James Harden hanging out at the strip club. I think it's 50-50 if you fight the Rockets.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Bucks laying 4.5 points, 224 total against the Celtics. This should be a fun game. Now, these are 2 good defenses. But the one thing I think that's misconstrued or misinterpreted with the Bucks a lot, Adam, is people look at their defensive rating and they say, man, they're really good, which they are. But they also have such a good offense, and they ran at such a fast pace last year that no team allowed more 3-point attempts than the Milwaukee Bucks either. So while they're very good, they aren't incapable of giving up big games to their opponents and having high scoring contests as well.
Yeah, they can definitely give up some big games because of the pace, like you said. It's kind of that thing that people get lulled into talking about narratives sometimes in DFS, not narratives revenge narratives, but just focusing in on one thing, saying oh, they're a good defensive team. But if you're ignoring how many possessions you get, it's not telling you the whole story. And the Bucks are definitely a team that they're efficient defensively, but they also give you a lot of possessions, which is helpful for DFS. The problem that you kind of run into here is just that Boston is priced for Kemba to be out, and Kemba is out, but it's baked into the pricing. So there's nobody that really stands out to me as great plays. Jason Tatum is certainly in that category at 9,200 where it wouldn't be surprising if he scores 50 fantasy points, but that's the case for like 15 different guys today. And so since he doesn't project quite as well, it's just tougher to get to him, especially because, again, raw ownership just isn't as important. Same kind of goes for Jaylen Brown. Same goes for, I think, pretty much the entire Boston team. Like Brown and Smart both certainly can get there. We've seen Smart have those games when Kemba's out where he just knocks down every open three that he takes, but it's really hard to rely on that on this particular slate.
So, okay, Mitchell Robinson confirmed starting, Adam.
Yep.
We do have confirmation. It's an interesting spot for sure. So on the Milwaukee side then, Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to come in at a high price all the time, but I'd argue, as you did earlier, that he's actually underpriced just given his skill set. The only thing that sucks, and I don't think you'd argue this, is he is almost always going to have be at a disadvantage from a playing time standpoint, so long as he's on the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, he's not going to get as many minutes as other superstars, but there's a couple of reasons that doesn't matter too much today. One is that it's the first game of the season, so you might not see 38 minutes from a lot of these guys that you would normally see it from. But also, and this is DraftKings specifically, he's $10,200. Like, this is a guy that should be approaching $12K. He's the best per minute fantasy player in the league. It's not close. The guy averages almost 1.9 DraftKings points per minute. And
he's playing a team that's actually good enough to stay competitive, which was a huge issue last year.
Right. And, the flip side of that is Boston's a good defensive team, but
right.
Even if you say, okay, Giannis is going to be worse than normal, worse than 1.9 DraftKings points per minute is still the best per minute player in the league. If you go back and look at last year, like there's this, idea that Giannis struggles against Boston, which by Giannis standards, maybe he does. But going back to the start of the 2018 season, the guy hasn't scored less than 52 DraftKings points against the Bucks. And he's got 3 games over 60. He's got 1 at 70. Like, he's still a phenomenal player regardless of the matchup, and he's only $10,200 on DraftKings. Like, he's $400 more expensive than Joel Embiid, but he averages half a fantasy point per minute more.
For sure. Thank God I have a mute button, man. I had something like stuck in here, and I have to mute it to cough every 15 seconds, but I'm a professional. If Jordan was a professional, he'd see me doing that, and he would cut away from me. But there I am with tongue hanging out of my face and everything. All right, so we agree on Giannis. It is semi-tough matchup, but I think he could get 34 minutes tonight. It wouldn't be shocking. All I'm saying is with Budenholzer, there's always the risk that, he's limited. No Eric Bledsoe anymore, though. What are your thoughts on the kind of auxiliary options here, starting with Jrue Holiday, who is sub 7K coming into this opener tonight?
Yeah, not much else from Milwaukee's looking that appealing to me outside of Giannis. I think that there's like Middleton and Jrue kind of remind me of how I feel about Smart and Jaylen Brown, where they're these mid-range guys that can certainly have the talent to go and get like 35, 40 fantasy points. I just don't think it gets it done today. Like, I think this is going to be such a high-scoring slate because of just there's so many mispriced guys. Like, DraftKings across the board is like $1,000 too cheap on half the guys playing today. So I think you're just gonna have a massively high scoring slate, and what you normally consider value just isn't going to cut it. And I think that it forces you to look at guys that are either very clearly underpriced and or in phenomenal matchups, and neither of those really apply to Middleton or Jrue, I don't think.
So is this game outside of Giannis kind of a wash for you then?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good real-life basketball game that has almost no interest outside of Giannis for me tonight.
We have Giannis projected at 23% ownership here. It's still quite a bit lower. That's on DraftKings, of course, quite a bit lower than Luka Doncic. And if you guys want to ever check out our ownership, our player projections, the Boom Bust tool, which is phenomenal, the lineup builder for those of you doing single hand building, 3 max lineups, Awesemo, Alex Baker, #1 ranked DFS player, built all of these tools. He uses these tools. He's won millions playing DFS or NBA DFS, and he just created the big board as well. That's also for hand building for those of you guys that aren't MMing, but we have the Fantasy Cruncher add-on and all of that stuff. Of course, all of our premium tools and articles that were not mentioned, get it for $1 single using the promo code Caruso. You have until the 29th. If you do it today for $1, you get everything included in our NBA package for $1 all the way through December 29th. That includes the Christmas Day games and everything. Tonight's slate, if you wanted to jump in right now, do it. Caruso. It's a great investment, and you're gonna be happy with it. That's why we're doing it for $1. Go to checkout awesemo.com/join. And if you have any questions, hit me up. My DMs are open at Laffy_D on Twitter. All right. New Orleans and Toronto. Another new look team here. The New Orleans Pelicans are 4-point dogs to the Raptors, 228.5 total. So we're expecting to see some points here. But now you're looking at this squad, Adam, and it looks a lot different than last year. You have Lonzo, you have Eric Bledsoe, you have Brandon Ingram. Of course, some of these guys were with the team. Zion Williamson is healthy, and Steven Adams as well, looking to bolster that front court defense. Do you like the New Orleans Pelicans today against a good Toronto defense?
Yeah, I do. I think there's some favorable pricing here. And, we talked about it. I mentioned it with the Milwaukee-Boston game that I think this is a slate where you really have to be hammering on guys that you think are underpriced. And Eric Bledsoe at 5,600 really stands out. Zion Williamson at 7,500 or 7,600 really stands out. Both of these guys I think are just a lot cheaper than they should be, even given the matchup here against Toronto. Bledsoe will play alongside Lonzo. This isn't a situation where he's he needs Lonzo to play poorly or lose minutes. It doesn't matter. He's gonna play alongside him. Lonzo's gonna have the ball in his hands, but Giannis had the ball in his hands plenty on Milwaukee too, and Bledsoe still averaged 1.14 DraftKings points per minute. This is someone that produces when he's on the floor. I expect him to get 30 to 32 minutes. So I think that he is underpriced. And then you look at Zion, who's not on any sort of minutes restriction this year. The guy played 34 minutes in the Pelicans' final preseason game, played down to the final buzzer of the fourth quarter. He's playing full minutes. He averaged 1.33 DraftKings points per minute last year. He averaged about the same in the preseason this year. He's going to be a 9K plus player, 2, 3, maybe shorter, 2 weeks from now, maybe less. So getting him at 7,500 is just very clearly a discount, regardless of who he's playing against.
Zion Williamson, or as Josh would call him, Julius Randle on steroids. Do you think at $7,500, he's still more than worth it here? And on FanDuel at, Zion coming in at 7,700 and power forward eligible, both spots you like?
Yeah, I like both spots. He's definitely one of the power forwards that I've been referring to throughout the show. Is just there's a few of them grouped together. You have Sabonis, you have Williamson, you have a couple others that just look like phenomenal plays that I think are really underpriced, and Zion's definitely one of them.
And just last thing here on the Pelicans, with Van Gundy at the helm in New Orleans, Eric Bledsoe under Budenholzer last year and for a couple of years now in Milwaukee didn't get the minutes we were looking for. Averaged right around 30 or 27 minutes per game. At 5,600, I have to at least bring him up, because if he comes in and gets considerable run, is this a spot you're willing to look towards, or do you just not think he's going to get the minutes here either?
You said Bledsoe?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like Bledsoe a lot at 5,600.
Okay.
I talked about him a bit while you weren't listening.
Sorry, listen, I'm trying to read chat. I'm trying to do two things at once, man.
I know, I got you.
All right. And by the way, someone in chat mentioned that you've been tweeting throughout the show, so I don't want to hear that shit. Anything else for the Pels?
Brandon Ingram is more appealing on FanDuel than DraftKings. I can't touch him at 8,600 on DraftKings, but 7,300 on FanDuel I think is fine. I'd still have him behind Bledsoe and behind Zion though.
I think this is going to be a good game, fun to watch, and a couple pretty viable DFS options. But when you talk about Toronto, pretty down season for Pascal Siakam last season. I won't say a down season. I don't know if he met people's expectations coming off that championship year, and then Kawhi Leonard was gone. But maybe you could argue it didn't necessarily help him. What are you doing with the Raptors?
It's a really good spot for them going up against the Pels. This is a team that plays fast. They shouldn't be that great defensively, I don't think. They lost, obviously, a great on-ball defender in Drew Holiday. I think that Siakam is fine. I would put him behind Sabonis. I'd put him behind Zion for sure in that price range where you have these power forwards. So it does make it kind of hard to get to him. The one guy that really stands out to me is Kyle Lowry on DraftKings in particular at 7,100. There's been some talk from Toronto about them limiting his minutes a little bit early on, but he's someone that plays the most minutes in the league or top three pretty much every year. If Kyle Lowry is going to go from 38, 39 minutes to 33, 34, and he's going to be $7,100 against the Pelicans, I don't really care. I still think it's a good salary. I still think he's a good play. So he looks pretty good. Secondary options, I think, in Siakam and Van Vliet. Anunoby looks okay at 5,200 on FanDuel, but there's a couple guys in that price range I like more. So it's basically a bunch of guys that I'm fine mixing in matching in tournaments. But the only one that I think really stands out is Lowry on DraftKings.
All right, so here's a fun one. Atlanta at Chicago. Going to be a lot of new faces here in Chicago this season for good reason. They're only 2-point dogs at home to the Atlanta Hawks, 233.5 point total. You know, this Atlanta team likes to run. That's what a lot of teams that aren't exactly good on defense do, because it's the only way they can make themselves competitive. Starting with the Hawks side, I keep wanting to call them the Falcons. Starting with the Hawks, this could be, I'm calling right now, this is a breakout year for John Collins. He's going to go bonkers, Adam. Watch, it's happening. Him and Trae Young going to be a ridiculously strong tandem this year. Now they've got Chicago today. What are you doing? What do you like?
Somehow on a 13-game slate, the Hawks and the Bulls might be the best DFS game on it.
Remember last year they went to, I think, triple overtime?
I do remember that, yeah.
Pretty fun.
But yeah, 232.5 point total here. It should be a really high-scoring game. Atlanta, I think, is going to be a really frustrating DFS team this year because they might have the deepest group of guys as far as just like NBA rotation caliber players in the league. But this year tonight they're missing several of them. Capella's out, Rondo's out, Chris Dunn's out. Okongwu's out as well, their first round pick. So they will by necessity have a tighter rotation. John Collins, I'm with you. He really stands out here. I think he's up there with Zion as one of the best power forward options because you're going to get a lot of center minutes from him. That's not something that's going to be the case for the entire season since they have Capella. But last year, without any of the other centers on the floor, John Collins played 637 minutes. He averaged 1.3 DraftKings points per minute. His rebounding percentage over that stretch was 18.7% compared to the season average of 16.4%. So I expect a pretty sizable bump for him in production tonight, with Bruno Fernando being basically the only center that I almost called them the Falcons too, that the Hawks have.
Tough life, man.
Yeah, it's because I do those football shows now. So Collins I think looks great. Trae Young is in that like Russell Westbrook, Dame Lillard category for me, where I don't think he's optimal, but I think he's still a very good play. I do have some concerns about Young this year as far as if he's going to live up to the production that we got last year. He averaged 1.5 DraftKings points per minute last year, 34.3% usage. There's a lot more mouths to feed on this Atlanta offense. You brought in Bogdan Bogdanovic, you brought in Danilo Gallinari. There's a lot more guys that can score. There's a lot more guys that can handle the ball. Not saying I think Trae Young's going to be bad. I just think he maybe is a little bit less productive than he was last year, but should still be very good. He only averaged 1.1 DraftKings points per minute in the preseason. I think he does better than that, but his usage rate dropped to 28.5%. I think that you definitely could see that 34% usage rate from last year take a couple steps back.
On the other side for the Bulls, Wendell Carter Jr. has been a guy that both you and I have always, I think, had high hopes for because we've seen the per minute capabilities and the potential. But whether it was foul trouble, whether it was injury, whether he just wasn't getting minutes, and Cristiano Felicio was somehow getting a lot of opportunity, is not something that's worth getting into at this point. But there are a lot of things to talk about here. I'm going to turn it over to you because, again, we don't have a lot of time. But Patrick Williams, someone that is going to be a question a lot tonight, and he has minimum salary coming into his debut.
The Bulls, I think, are the most underpriced team on DraftKings tonight. It's just ridiculous, the salaries that they're at. You mentioned Patrick Williams. We'll start with him just because he's minimum salary on DraftKings and FanDuel. I really don't know how. He wasn't any good in the preseason. He averaged like 0.68 DraftKings points per minute, but he's pretty clearly going to play a big role for this team coming off the bench. He started a couple preseason games over Otto Porter, but I don't think that'll be the case in the regular season. But I still think you're getting 27, 28, if not more minutes from him at $3K flat on DraftKings and $3,500 on FanDuel. I don't think he's going to be a 0.7 fantasy point per minute guy long term. But even if he's getting like 0.7 or 0.75 fantasy points per minute at the absolute minimum and playing close to 30 minutes, that's going to be one of the best values on the slate. So he looks really good from a point per dollar standpoint. And then you move to these other guys on DraftKings in particular, $4,400 for Wendell Carter. Assuming he doesn't get in foul trouble, playing 28, 29, 30 minutes, not playing for Jim Boylan anymore, which is a huge, huge thing. Yeah. Because Billy Donovan isn't quite as into hockey line changes as Jim Boylan was. So that should benefit the entire team, but also Wendell Carter Jr., who, this guy produces at just shy of 1 fantasy point per minute It's just a matter of being on the floor. He's
so
4,400
cheap tonight.
He's 4,400 going up against the Hawks. I don't really know how to get away from him. Lauri Markkanen's 4,800 going up against the Hawks. He's another fantasy point per minute guy. So you have the value there. You have the value in Patrick Williams, and then you get to the backcourt where you have Zach Levine at $7,900, averaged 1.25 fantasy points per minute last year. He's going to be playing more minutes alongside Kobe White this year, which in theory can take some usage away from him. But it's worth noting that last year he actually averaged more fantasy points per minute with White on the floor than without White. So it's not a foregone conclusion that it hurts Levine. And at the very worst, it's just that Levine will be a little bit less predictable, but he's still going to have that massive ceiling. So there's really, I like everybody on Chicago on DraftKings pretty much. It's just a matter of, how much. And I think Carter is a priority. I think Markkanen looks really good. Williams is a priority, and then Levine, I'm happy with however much I get. It's just a really deep position, obviously.
Just because we don't have a ton of time like we usually do. In summation, who would you say, because you said you love this game, there's a lot of underpriced guys, for someone tuning in or maybe didn't catch everything, who are your favorite plays from this game? And in context to the slate, it sounds like there are a lot of plays you really like from this game.
Yeah, Patrick Williams, Wendell Carter, Lauri Markkanen, Zach Levine. Love all those guys. Love John.
How many would you play on the same lineup together?
I'm fine with 4 on DraftKings, honestly.
Really? On a 13-game slate?
They're just so underpriced. And it's not, I wouldn't want it in every lineup, but
what if it happened?
Lauri Markkanen's a 6K player. Wendell Carter's a 6K player. Levine's probably 9K. And Patrick Williams is the minimum. If those are the 4, if it's Levine, Markkanen, Carter, Williams, I don't really have a problem with it because they're going to account for such a high percentage of the Bulls scoring.
You're right. Fair. And hopefully the minutes are there as well. If the minutes are big, you're going to be in business.
Right. I don't think I would want, I think I'm okay with 4 if one of the 4 is Patrick Williams. I don't think I want Carter, Markkanen, Levine, and White together.
Absolutely. Because Patrick Williams is going to be a guy that if you have 4 of them, he's getting you to another high-priced stud, and that's the whole point. So San Antonio at Memphis, the Bulls 2-point dogs in what used to be considered the grindhouse, 229-point total. The only thing I'll say here and pass it over to you is a couple of years ago, Adam, this was a Memphis team that would slow opposing teams down. They'd stick their feet in the mud and they'd grind the game to a halt. Nowadays, Memphis has seen a ton of roster turnover. They're going to try and play quick, particularly with John Moran controlling the pace of the offense. What are you doing with the Memphis Grizzlies?
Yeah, the same goes for San Antonio. If you told me 2 years ago that you were going to be getting Memphis San Antonio games with 230 totals, I would have laughed pretty hard. But
4 years ago, it would have been 192.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I mean, Memphis pushes it, and the issue here on the Memphis side is mostly pricing for me. Jonas Valanciunas, I think, is a good option, but it's just really hard for me to pay $6,700 on FanDuel or $7,100 on DraftKings when I can just find an extra $1,000 and roster Andre Drummond for probably 5 or 6 more minutes. So it puts Valanciunas in the conversation in tournaments just because he averages 1.25 fantasy points per minute. He's really, really good from a fantasy standpoint. It's just a kind of a minutes thing for him. And the fact that there's a million centers on the slate. Morant kind of gets lost in the shuffle for me at guard. I would rather roster Zach Levine at a little bit cheaper price tag on DraftKings, about the same on FanDuel. There's a lot of point guards that I like a little bit more. That's not to say Morant can't have a monster game because he's obviously really good, but gotta kind of draw the line somewhere. So there's not a whole lot that I like from the Memphis side. I will point out Kyle Anderson's 3,800 on FanDuel. He was starting at the 4 in the preseason. His rebounding numbers were up a bit from last year. His usage was up a bit from last year, possibly as a result of playing a little bit closer to the basket. He's never a really exciting guy to roster, but at 3,800, I think he's worth a mention. And on DraftKings, Dylan Brooks is 5,400. This is someone that is very capable of giving you a terrible game, but he's also capable of just lighting it up because he goes out there and he shoots 26.5% usage rate in the preseason, 24.5% last year. The guy just shoots every time he touches the ball, and that's obviously pretty appealing at 5,400.
What about San Antonio? Only thing I'll say here is Derek White is out for this game. Is this matchup against Memphis enough for you to get you on a few of these players who have been so difficult to predict over the years?
Yeah, especially DeJounte Murray. He's that same price point as Eric Bledsoe, where I like both of those guys a lot. But Derek White being out does help to solidify Murray's minutes. The problem that you've kind of seen in the past with Murray is that Derek White's good, and sometimes Derek White plays too good for DeJounte Murray to get back on the floor. That obviously won't be the case tonight. So I feel pretty good about expecting 30 plus minutes from Murray. He's over a fantasy point per minute player. He scores, he plays defense, he picks up assists, he does everything well. And so I think he's a lot cheaper cheaper than he should be. Aldridge and DeRozan, both secondary options for me. I think they're a little bit underpriced. I just don't think that they're quite as good as some players that are priced around them. So Murray's the one that really stands out as a priority.
Okay. Detroit and Minnesota. I have a feeling there's a few things that are going to pique your interest here. Minnesota Timberwolves at home, 5.5 point favorites, 224 total. We'll start with the home team, Minnesota. Karl Anthony Towns coming off just a brutal past several months. I'm sure he's happy to be back playing basketball again. But when you look at his price point, he is up there, Adam, along with some of the most expensive players on the slate. Is his being comparable to Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, even Luka Doncic, if you're just talking about no specific position? Where does that put him in the conversation for you at that high price?
It's really similar to how I feel about Embiid, because I think it's a good spot for him. I think he should have a lot of success. He's obviously really good. It's just, especially on DraftKings, he shouldn't be the same or close to the same salary as Giannis or Luka. On FanDuel, it's a lot more appealing because Luka and Giannis are really expensive, and you can actually you get like a price gap between them, like you should. It's just really hard for me to put Towns into a lineup over those studs on DraftKings, though. Okay.
Anything else for Minnesota that does stick out to you against the Pistons?
Stick out's not the right word. I think D'Angelo Russell's a perfectly fine play. We also just got news that Alec Burks is not starting for the Knicks. I'm not sure who is, and that Davis Bertans will be limited to 18 to 20 minutes.
Yep. So nothing really from Minnesota. What about Detroit? Blake Griffin, $7,200. I tell you what, man, it's crazy that Jeremy Grant has kind of propelled his career forward in a huge way. And last season, the postseason did a lot for him, but he's still $4,700.
Yeah, it's tough for me to get to either of those two guys. For one, I don't really know who decided to price Blake Griffin the same as Zion.
It makes no sense.
No, like if Zion's 7,500, Blake should be like 48. So it's really tough to get to Griffin.
Give it a week and a half. Blake's going to be like $5,900.
Yeah, like I think Blake's fine. It's just that like Zion's a completely different tier of player. As far as Grant goes, he's kind of interesting because I think he has a high ceiling. He's going to take a bigger role in this offense. That's a big reason he left Denver and came to Detroit. You saw it in the preseason where he had about a 26% usage rate. The problem is he's not that good offensively. So him having a high usage rate just translates to him missing a lot of shots in most games. But there will be games where the shots go in and he just has a higher ceiling than he ever had playing with Jokic and with Murray and those guys in Denver. But it's still going to be really tough to bank on that, especially on a 13-game slate where there's a million other guys that I actually feel good about. I think the pieces that look the best from Detroit are actually Killian Hayes at point guard at 3,900 on DraftKings. No interest in him on FanDuel at 52, but 3,900 for the starting point guard here. He has experience playing in Europe, playing against, adults, which is nice. He struggled a bit in the preseason, but still averaged over 0.8 DraftKings points per minute. If you're going to get 28, 29 minutes from him, I think he's a pretty solid value at 3,900. And then Mason Plumlee, if you are paying down at center, I think is one of the options on DraftKings. He's a good per minute player. I expect you get around 24, 25 minutes from him. The opportunity cost is really difficult to justify paying down there. Like if he scores 6 times his salary and gets you like 26 points, it's probably not going to be enough tonight, but he is at least a good enough player that he can go for 33, 34 in his good games.
It's a bad roster, Adam.
It is a very bad roster.
It is a bad roster. So would you say that Killian Hayes for you is someone that you intend on having a decent amount of exposure to at that price point?
Yeah, he shows up out of anyone in this game. When I just like make my top projected lineups, he shows up the most.
Okay. You want to talk Sacramento and Denver?
Not really. It's going to be quick.
All right. Well, we got to do it anyway. Sacramento Kings, 7.5 point dogs, 226.5 point total in Denver. The Nuggets coming off one of the most improbable runs that we've seen in postseason history for the NBA. Fun to watch, didn't get there, but overall, when healthy, this is a really spectacular basketball team that is deep, which also makes them kind of tough from time to time. We didn't have Will Barton, remember, for the entire, I think it was the entire bubble, right, Adam?
Yeah, he missed the entire bubble.
Missed the entire bubble. Jamal Murray became an absolute stud. And, imagine being him. You got everything going for you, if you know what I mean. He's expensive, though. So is Denver with Jokic and Murray at their specific price points, despite how fantastic they are, against Sacramento. Is that matchup and their talent and overall usage enough to get there tonight?
Not really. I mean, like if you land them in tournaments, that's fine, but they're not priorities for me. And even in tournaments, I think I'd rather be looking to like Embiid or Towns. It's a healthy Denver team, and they're not really mispriced like so many other teams are. The one thing that I would point out from Denver is on FanDuel, Michael Porter's only 5,400 at small forward. He kind of, like I mentioned earlier, like OG Anunoby's a little cheap at small forward. There was someone else I mentioned that was like a decent small forward play. But now you get someone like Michael Porter that actually produces at greater than a fantasy point per minute. Seemingly has worked on his defense, maybe won't get benched every other game by Michael Malone this year. 5,400 is a mispricing on him on FanDuel.
Okay. Anything else for Denver?
No, that's it for Denver.
Sacramento. I've got to ask you about Hassan Whiteside. It's a spot to me where my one concern is just that Richaun Holmes is someone that has actually been worked in, that has been a preferred option in this front court. And I don't necessarily know what Luke Walton intends on doing with Hassan Whiteside. Are his minutes going to be enough to get him in lineups? Because $3,800, remember Whiteside with Miami several years back, he was playing 15 minutes and racking up double-doubles. So it's doable, but is he going to get there? Can he get there? And is it too big of a slate to even consider him?
On DraftKings, I think he's a good play. Like 5,600 on FanDuel, he can certainly smash that price point, but the opportunity cost is so high, I don't really want to take that risk because, like you said, Holmes is a preferred option. And I think there's a pretty realistic chance that Holmes plays like 30, 32 minutes and Whiteside plays 16 to 18. But 3,800 on DraftKings, if Whiteside does get that 15, 16, 18 minutes, he probably still is fine. But the thing is, if he finds his way to 21 or 22 minutes, he's probably scoring like 30 plus fantasy points.
Yep.
So whereas like we talked about Plumlee and I said he's decent at that salary, he probably does okay, but he has to really have a good game to be someone you want. Whiteside, if he gets the minutes, he's going to get those points. Like he doesn't really not produce when he's on the floor. So Whiteside, it kind of feels like, even though the minutes are in question, it still feels like he has a pretty high floor and then a monster ceiling to go with it.
Yep. Hey guys, stick around. Live Before Lock coming up right after this. It's going to be Chris Spags and Greg Ehrenberg. And of course, look, we got almost 3,000 watching. Help us out. Hit that thumbs up. It really does help us a ton to combat that YouTube algorithm. But also, more importantly, subscribe. If you only want to do one of those, hit that subscribe button. Help us get to 50K if you like what we do here. It's greatly appreciated. Merry Christmas, of course. Adam, Sacramento, anything else for the Kings before we get on to these final two games?
Buddy Hield's 5,200 on FanDuel. He's basically the Michael Porter version from FanDuel or from the Kings.
Utah and Portland. The Utah Jazz are 2-point favorites, 226 total. Anything you like here on either side? I'll let you have the floor on this one. I don't have a lot to say.
Yeah, there's a couple pieces. I think Gobert's underpriced on both DraftKings and FanDuel. I'd rather get to Drummond, but if I can't quite find that money, I think it's a pretty good spot for Gobert. He has some additional block upside here too, going up against Lillard and McCollum. I think Bojan Bogdanovic at 4,600 is a pretty strong play on FanDuel. Other than that, I don't really have much from the Utah side. From the Portland side, I think you can look to Dame, who it's actually a decent matchup for him. If you look last year, Utah allowed the third most pick and roll possessions per game, and they were in the 37th percentile in defensive efficiency. Dame's always one of the highest pick and roll frequency guys in the league, so it actually sets up as a pretty good matchup for Dame. Again, there's a lot of options up there, but I think it's a good spot for Dame. Nurkic is certainly a good tournament play as well.
Any top options from this game?
No, it's more so just guys that I'm happy getting into my lineups, but not guys that I expect to be like my highest owned.
And guys, by the way, we're going to extend these shows for longer slates. We just had a scheduling mix up. So I promise we're never going to rush it like this. We're trying to get it all to you as good as we can, but normally we're not going to rush these games and we'll make it so it's a lot better and a smoother transition from game to game in the future. Dallas and Phoenix, Luka Doncic. I mean, what else do we need to say? I don't even know if you need to say anything about him, Adam. They're 233 total in this game, 1.5-point favorites. Should be a fun game, and Luka's egregiously underpriced.
Yeah, probably the best play on the slate on DraftKings at 10K. He's a good play on FanDuel too, but do keep in mind the scoring doesn't favor him as much. Porzingis being out, he actually averaged fewer points per minute when Porzingis missed games last year than when he was in, but it was still 1.64 DraftKings points per minute, which is James Harden level production. So just play Luka. Don't worry about it on DraftKings. If you can get to him on FanDuel, that's really good too. He's really the only thing that stands out to me from Dallas though.
All right, well, you close it out. Phoenix, we're up against it on the nose right here. Phoenix Suns against the Mavericks. Who do you have?
Yeah, nothing that I think nobody I expect to be my highest owned guys, but I do think any amount of Booker, Ayton, Paul I get to looks pretty good. I expect Booker's usage to come down, but his efficiency to go up playing alongside Paul. I expect Ayton to have a good season, and I think this is a perfectly good matchup for him. And then Paul should be right around where he was, 1.15 fantasy points per minute last year. So I think all three of those guys look fine. Just not my highest owned guys.
Thanks so much for watching, guys. Remember, Adam's deep dive is entirely free. It's it's more words than most of us even know how to read at this point. Spags and Greg coming up next. They got you live before lock. And hey, if you're around tomorrow, we got the happy hour strategy show, 11 a.m. talking football and probably doing a little drinking, having some fun. Other than that, if we don't see you until after the holidays, have a great holiday. Merry Christmas. Stick around. Good luck tonight, guys.
A dumb slate already. I can.
Just happy we got the Rockets news before the show.
Yeah, just got rid of all my Horford right under the wire. All right, how about now? All right, so
It's good for me. Yep.
all right. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another here of NBA DFS analysis on the Awesemo YouTube channel. I'm Chris Spags, joined once again by my friend and yours. You know him as Greg Ehrenberg. He is, in fact, the very same Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Very good. I thought there was going to be a follow-up. The very same Greg Ehrenberg as what? I thought there was going to be some kind of follow-up. I was like, oh, what is he adding there? It's like, I guess it's my turn to talk.
No, it's just throw it to you in a way that I don't really have anything special planned. It's the last day before the holidays. I feel like whatever we get out of the show, the better. But lots of plugs here to hit up top. And make sure if you're playing today's slate, it's a gigantic slate, one that we just lost a game with the Houston OKC game, one that we were talking about while the mics were hot. Very important game, it looked like. Now, not so much. Or important that you get those players out of your lineups. But more important than that, go to awesemo.com/join. Use the promo code Caruso. You still have a package there. We'll give you $1 for access to all of our NBA data through the 29th. So, you're getting about a week's worth. It's much cheaper than it would normally be. So even though, you're not getting a ton of time, you're going to probably have some good results, especially over these next few slates where it's going to be hard to figure things out for a lot of people out there. So make sure you're going to awesemo.com/join and using that promo code Caruso. And Greg, let's talk about the slate. We talked about the Houston OKC game, and that was one that looked very important, but now not so much. So I think the assumption was there'd be a good amount of value in that game. Guys like George Hill, Sterling Brown was popping a bit. Eric Gordon, a little bit more expensive, looking pretty good. But now those guys are gone, Greg. So you tell me who's looking like your number one value play on the slate. And I swear to God, I know you're going to say Killian Hayes.
Killian Hayes is definitely up there, but there's other guys I like too that I have in the mix. Patrick Williams is somebody who a lot of people like. I'm just a little wary of the ownership on him. So I have exposure to him, but not quite as much as the field. And then there's other guys, Killian Hayes, Lauri Markkanen, I think is too cheap. Wendell Carter Jr. There's a whole host of guys. Hassan Whiteside is another one. And there's another thing too. Like I'm just looking over my exposures now, and they're kind of new looking to me too, because I had a whole bunch of exposure to the Rockets game and had to throw all that out. So I'm just kind of looking over it now and being like, oh, that's interesting. I have a lot of exposure to that guy now that I didn't know that I had 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, I was actually watching your stream this morning. Greg did the NBA strategy show for the first time, sharing some camera space with Awesemo himself, Alex Baker. And you guys were like, yeah, Al Horford's looking pretty good. And Alex is like, yeah, his rebound rate's about 30%. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be a smash play. People are going to think old Al Horford, what a piece of crap he is last year. And no, it turns out no Al Horford. His redemption song will come another day. But let's see the chalk play of the day. And let's talk about the chalk here. We could talk more about value as we go. Some guys will pop up that going to be more meaningful in terms of ownership, like the aforementioned Killian Hayes. But Greg, on the other side of the spectrum, we have Luka projected for about 40% ownership on DraftKings, a pretty similar amount on FanDuel as well. I'm pulling that number up right now in the recent ownership update. I guess a little bit less chalky on FanDuel. It seems still 20% there, but one of the top owned point guard plays. So what are you doing with Luka? We do know no Kristaps Porzingis for probably the first month of the year, it does look like. And that's been a spot in the past where a bit of a dip in assist production, at least going back to last year for Luka, but the usage off the chain, a little bit more rebounding for him. And a spot tonight, late night hammer against Phoenix seems like the one where Luka's stuck it to Phoenix in the past. And I find it hard to get away from him, even with him being the chalkiest play on the slate.
Yeah, he definitely makes them remember that they did not draft him a couple of years ago with the first overall pick. And he does it to a lot of teams too, because he kind of crushes against everybody. To your point about Porzingis being out and Luka's assist rate dropping, that is true, but not something that's overly concerning to me, because like you said, the usage rating goes up so much to the point that his per 36 production in terms of fantasy points goes up when Kristaps Porzingis is off the court. And the reason that the assist rate goes down is just because Luka's shooting the ball so much more often when Porzingis is off the court. So to me, I think Luka is the number one guy to pay up for on this slate. I think there's a little bit of a debate that could be had between him and Giannis. But the reason I lean a little bit more towards Luka is, number one, we have Porzingis out. And then number two, also, it's so hard to trust the minutes for Giannis on a night-to-night basis, because Budenholzer just does not like to give guys extended minutes. It's not something that's in his philosophy. So I think that the minutes ceiling is a lot higher for Luka Doncic, and it's hard to expect Giannis to play, north of even like 35 minutes on most games.
Yeah, I think at Awesemo right now, we have Luka's minutes projected at 35. Part of what Awesemo provides this projection is the stat lines for the game. So that's actually where I pull my data in. I use all his minutes projections, and they get updated as you go. And he does have Giannis projected for 31 minutes. And you'd think this year, too, having Bobby Portis in the mix, a guy who kind of a little more naturally more like a Giannis type than Ersan Ilyasova was last year, or even DJ Wilson, who they had some hopes for in the past. Like, it does seem like Giannis's minutes, you can't really expect an uptick here, even though his price, pretty good. And I think still some ways to get to Luka and Giannis lineups, but a little bit less easy than it was before with some of that OKC Houston value. What are you doing if you're not going to Luka or Giannis, Greg? Because there are some guys in that 8K, 9K range that could be valuable. The Trae Youngs of the world, who maybe taking a bit of a drop in terms of ball handling time this year, with some more bodies there who need to be fed. Guys like Bojan Bogdanovic, also some of their younger players looking for more run, though no Clint Capella for the Hawks, so that could be interesting. Are you getting to guys like Trae or Damian Lillard? I know the deeper dive guys just talked about actually not a bad matchup against Utah because of the defensive approach there. But what are you getting besides the high-priced Luka and Giannis?
All right, so I find Jamal Murray to be pretty interesting on this slate. He is only projecting for 1.5% ownership, and he did play really well in the preseason. We can't take too much weight into that, but with that said, we're talking about one of the best rookies really in recent memory last year from the point guard position, going from his rookie year to his sophomore year. So I think we have to expect a little bit of an uptick in production from him. And the other thing, too, is that Moran's playing time was not always consistent last year. And then towards the end of the year, the bubble games and the end of the regular season, we saw his playing time start to trend upward. So I'm looking at Moran as my favorite contrarian play at the position. It's a favorable matchup against the Spurs, and it's just so little ownership for a guy that I think is probably in store to have a really good season, especially if he takes a leap from his rookie year to his sophomore year, which I don't think is a crazy thing to think given how well regarded he was coming out of the draft.
Yeah, I think I'm getting a little more of his teammates, but I do think the John Morant hype is real. And the fact that, he's under 1% projected ownership in our most recent run. And those also get updated throughout the hour. And that's part of the Caruso package you can get for $1 at awesemo.com/join. But yeah, Morant at, really on the slate this size, I think any guys you can get under that percentage of ownership where Morant, we know the ceiling is there. We know the price is pretty reasonable. It's definitely a spot that you can get some exposure to if you're MMEing today. What else, I guess, appeals to you the most here? Because I'm trying to figure out what the approach is and not in lineups without Luka. Because to me, I think Luka's a smash play. I think he should be in about half your lineups. So for me, that's my personal preference. At least I think he's going to be one of the top one plays on the slate about 20% of the time. But more than that, I just feel like he's a safe chance to get to 50 fantasy points. But besides that, I feel like Damian Lillard would be the one I can make the best case for. At Westbrook, I think the role a little bit, some uncertainty there with Beal in the mix, certainly going to probably be a decent comparison to Houston last year. But what are your feelings here on going to, I guess, Lillard or, I think Lillard's in particular because he's really the one who jumps out when I'm looking through everything again.
Let's see. Lillard, I didn't get any exposure to him, so I'm not going to say him. It's also just playing against Utah. It's generally a tough matchup for guards. Funny enough, even with Rudy Gobert, at least the last few years, Utah's done really well against guards, but has oddly kind of struggled against big men from a fantasy perspective. But Lillard, I just don't really love the matchup against Utah. And we just get to a point, too, where, I mean, almost every single team is playing tonight, so we can't roster everybody. And generally, if I paid up, I went to Luka or Morant was my contrarian option there at point guard. So, I mean, most slates, I wouldn't say that you can't play Lillard against Utah, but it's just a thing where there's like 50 viable options at the point guard position tonight, and he didn't make the cut for me.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's, different approaches you can have to the tournaments out there. And, I'm sure a lot of people just slam dunk Luka in and be happy with it. And that's a move, I think I'm going to make a good amount of the time. But much like yesterday, we talked about some of the tournament pivots out there. I ended up not having enough Dennis Schroeder yesterday, which of course that's how it goes on a 2-game slate. But maybe some ways here to get away from Luka if you are a little more willing to take some risk here, guys like Damian Lillard. Lillard, Dragic, Fox, Morant, all these guys under 5% projected ownership. So some ways to go there. People actually, let's answer the super chat real fast because I think it's an easy one. We got one from Charlie Jones asking thoughts on Dwayne Bacon or Reggie Bullock over this Patrick Williams chalk. I mean, those two are actually starting. I think Williams, we don't know if he's starting or not yet, unless there's been a lineup that's come through. But Greg, Williams for the Bulls, the rookie coming in from FSU, expected to be one of the highest owned plays on the slate with a minimum price on DraftKings, but still not a high usage guy, not a guy who really contributes meaningfully in the peripherals. So what are you doing with him? And would you want to go to two of these guys like Dwayne Bacon or Reggie Bullock?
So I'm a little underweight to Patrick Williams, but with that said, if you want to pivot to him, I don't think either of those guys are the players to pivot to. So I think let's look at some of the other, and also if he's in the chat, does he need it to be a specific position that he's looking for a pivot to? Does it have to be the flat minimum price? Because there are other value options like Killian Hayes, who I think is really good, who we could talk on a little bit. And it's just, I don't think that Bullock or who was the other name you said again?
Dwayne Bacon was the other one.
Yeah, I don't think Bacon or Bullock are the guy, but there are other min price options that we could get to. It just depends exactly what it is that he needs. Let me look at flat min.
I think getting a little bit more money going to a Okoro is the one that seems the most viable to me, but even that I'm not feeling fantastic about.
Yeah, so I mean, at least Okoro is starting for the Cavaliers. If we're comparing rookie players, though, Okoro versus Patrick Williams, I don't know that they're all that much different in terms of how good they're going to be in their first year. I think that Okoro is probably actually even the better prospect. I think that's a reasonable pivot, but also not somebody I really have exposure to. Reggie Bullock, I have 0% of. Dwayne Bacon, I have 0% of. Are there any other players that you have ownership to as I'm flipping through this right now that are
yeah, that's the thing to me. And I think that's part of, depending how you're viewing slates and Charlie just said in the chat, he's just looking for somebody else who would be in that same price point. And, I think there's a very realistic approach to just going to a different price point. Like you're trying to get different. You don't have to get different directly with another minimum price guy. You can go and find $700 or more and go to Mason Plumlee. You can go to Hassan Whiteside. You can go, I'm just going through some of the guys who have decent projections. You can go find 900, go to Killian Hayes. Like that's probably more the move than just jamming in a 3K guy and hoping you get there, because I don't think Williams will kill you tonight. Like I think that's sort of with the ownership he has, but that to me is the more logical approach. Go to guys who actually have good projections rather than just trying to force in a flat minimum guy.
Yeah, so let's talk about Killian Hayes then, because Killian Hayes is the sub 4K guy that I have the most exposure to tonight and actually like the most. So here's the case for Killian Hayes. Number one, that Pistons roster is hot garbage. They stink. There's no talent on that roster. And if you're trying to figure out where the minutes and usage are going, it's really hard because they just don't have good players. And then Killian Hayes is somebody who they use the high draft pick on, somebody who I'm high on coming from overseas. And I think they're going to give him as much run as he could handle. I don't necessarily know that's going to be like 40 minutes or something like that, but as long as he's playing reasonably well, I expect him to play over 30 minutes. He's a point guard, so he's going to have the ball in his hands a ton, which means that one, he's probably going to take shots and he's going to have good opportunity to score fantasy points with the amount of time the ball is going to be in his hands. And if you look at some of the other players on the roster, and like I said, if you're trying to figure out where the shots are going to go, there's Hayes, there's Blake Griffin, and then I just don't know who else. I mean, they've said that they think that Jeremy Grant is one of the best shooters in the league, which I think is a crazy statement to make, but maybe they actually believe that because they just paid him a whole ton of money. But I think that Killian Hayes is probably going to be the second best fantasy producer on that team outside of Blake Griffin.
No, I think you're right here. And that's, I also am playing a similar amount of Killian Hayes today. I don't think he's a fantastic player personally. I do think, though, he's a guy who contributes in a bunch of categories. I mean, we've seen him turn the ball over a lot in the preseason. I think there are some concerns there. And I do think if you really don't feel strong, or you feel strongly about Killian Hayes not being your guy, you could find $200 more and go to Delon Wright, who's got a similar opportunity in that backcourt. But I agree. I think Hayes, to me, at 3,900, a guy who should see, you would think, 30 minutes today. Like, I don't know how you really go wrong with that. And, and if he bombs out, I think that's still going to open up enough things here where you can get different with some of your higher price guys, or just get the right higher price guys.
Yeah, and I'm surprised that Killian Hayes isn't like popular. I mean, he's coming in at sub 15% ownership the last I looked. That's really low for a guy who I think is in that kind of opportunity and projects as well as he does in our projections.
I think he came. Are you talking about DraftKings ownership or FanDuel?
DraftKings.
Yeah, DraftKings, he came up a little bit now. He's 25 or 26.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was much lower when I looked right before the show.
Which to me seems about right, honestly. Des Thomas saying, is D Rose out tonight? D Rose is not starting, so that's why you want the guy who's getting the starters minutes. Rose is going to be minutes limited again, coming off the bench, and that's been the rotation through the preseason. Is going to be the one, at least to start the year here. So that's why it's not a D Rose question here for if you're playing Killian Hayes or Delon Wright. Trying to see, the ownership is so spread out here. What else are you getting the most of? Because Andre Drummond's been a popular question today, and the expectation with him, no Kevin Love for the Cavaliers. Drummond, 26% projected ownership. I guess he and Wendell Carter really look like the two highest owned center plays. And I'll say personally, I did get some Carter, but I greatly prefer Drummond if you can find the money to get there.
Yeah, so I overall have more exposure to Andre Drummond today across FanDuel and DraftKings. Wendell Carter is also a really strong play on DK, but here's the case for Andre Drummond. I think what some people are concerned about, at least based on some of the questions that I've gotten during the day, is, well, he wasn't consistent with Cleveland last year and the minutes weren't always there. But let's look at the reason why. And it was because there was a lot of games where Tristan Thompson either played the bulk minutes as center, or there were some games where Andre Drummond just didn't play in the fourth quarter and they just closed with Andre Drummond. Not a concern anymore. I meant Tristan Thompson closed the game. Not a concern anymore because Tristan Thompson's now on the Celtics. So the center minutes now open way up for Andre Drummond. Then to the other thing you mentioned also, Kevin Love's out. So now we're going to expect a ton of rebounds going to Andre Drummond. He's probably going to get basically every missed shot rebound that the Cavaliers get is probably going to Drummond. And then also the minutes are not a concern because that he's the only center left on the roster. So Drummond and Larry Nance more of a play on FanDuel than DraftKings, but I think both of them are in a really good spot for Cleveland today.
Yeah, I'm definitely more of a lean towards Drummond. I mean, he's had in games without Kevin Love over the last year playing for the Cavs, since the trade that happened, he's began about a 31% usage rate, the rebound rate, actually flat, which kind of surprised me. You'd think he gets a little bit more with no Kevin Love on the floor. And granted, it's not a perfect sample size. I think it was only like 100 and something minutes there. But still, Drummond, going to get the usage, going to get a little more opportunity. He's been upwards of a 2 fantasy point per minute guy in the preseason. You can't necessarily expect that to continue. But going against Charlotte, I just really find it hard to believe that Drummond kills you. Whether he's worth, the 25% plus ownership, I think is a big question for him, but I'm willing to be there a good amount. What are you doing with Wendell Carter? Because he does project extremely well. I think he's one of those guys that people will probably play a lot here. I'm just not as much of a believer, I guess, in Wendell Carter and his ability. I feel like I'd rather get a little bit less ownership and get a little bit cheaper with Plumlee or just go up to some of these other guys. But Greg, how are you feeling about Wendell Carter with about 30% of the field expected to be on him?
Yeah, so, I mean, here's the thing. I like Wendell Carter Jr. as a player, but there's two issues with him. Number one was something that Alex mentioned earlier. He gets in foul trouble a lot. And then the other thing also, he gets hurt a lot. I mean, something we saw from a ton last year, he dealt with multiple ankle sprains, and that kept him off the court a lot. Then he came back to foul trouble. But when he is on the floor, he's a good fantasy producer, and the Bulls give him minutes when he stays healthy and when he stays out of foul trouble. So if there's a time to target Wendell Carter Jr., I think it's on opening day. This is the first game of the season. We know he's as healthy as he's ever going to be. And as long as he could avoid foul trouble, I mean, he's a guy who, I'll bring up his pricing from last year. If I remember correctly, even with him somewhat struggling last year, he spent almost the entire season priced in like the high 5K, low 6K range for DraftKings. And that's something that I always reference, that I like to look at as kind of a litmus test for value, is what has been some of these guys' baseline price when just all else is kind of an equal situation. And so Wendell Carter is just grossly underpriced in my opinion.
No, I agree. He's way too cheap. That much is for sure. And I guess you could say a similar thing. Our boy Greg S.J. Asking in the YouTube chat about Lowry Markkanen, who is going to be Another guy who should have a little bit of ownership on him and maybe is kind of a pivot. I don't know that I necessarily consider him a pivot quite so much, but he's going to be actually, his ownership has come up quite a bit now. He's at 27% projected ownership. And I think there's just some concerns. Like I get, the Hawks matchup historically has been a good one. They're playing with pace. One of the highest pace teams last year, probably should be as high, if not higher this year, given some of the guys that they added and just they need to create more possession so guys can get shots up. But I don't know that I trust a 27% owned Lowry Markkanen, and it's going to be sharing a lot of groupings with Kobe White and Zach Levine, guys who do like to chuck, Patrick Williams as well. Like, I think for one thing, for sure, if you're running an optimizer, I would limit some of these guys. But how are you feeling about Lowry, Greg, and this high ownership? And really, how would you handle the Bulls where a lot of these guys look like they'll be popular in a way that maybe is a bit unexpected?
All right, so two-part question here. Number one, I do like Markkanen for his price on this slate. Number two, in terms of how I'm handling the Bulls, I do have a rule set up in Cruncher, which just have no more than two Bulls in the same lineup together, just so I don't have these lineups where it's like, oh my God, I have Zach Levine, Kobe White, Lauri Markkanen, and Wendell Carter Jr. all together in lineups, because a lot of the guys in their roster individually rate out as really good value plays. But I also think you're really capping your upside if you just have like four Bulls in a lineup or something like that, unless it's just a full game stack and you have like Trae Young and John Collins coming back with it. But Markkanen is an individual play. It's another thing where he's just really underpriced, and I like to get exposure to players who are underpriced. The concern here is that the Bulls don't seem very high on him for the future. They drafted Patrick Williams, who could play a similar position. They didn't pick up the player option on Markkanen, which leaves open the chance he's going to leave in the offseason. But still, look at him last year, another year where didn't quite have the sophomore year that most of us expected, but still was priced over 6,000 for most of the season. Then you go back to his rookie year where he finished the season priced over 7,000, was as high as 8,000 at times. So that's something else. We're getting a player who's just too cheap based on the production that we've seen from him in the past.
No, I think that's reasonable there. And, and if you're going to play a good amount of Bulls or take a buy-in on these guys who maybe have been a little bit specious in the past, doing it against Atlanta, still not going to be a bad spot for all the changes they've made, especially without Capella out there. Like, they're not better defensively. They just have more guys who can score, and probably just means more Bulls are going to have to score more. We got another super chat here from Clayton Ortner asking, and we'll also jump to the premium Slack, which is part of that Awesemo Plus membership, and use that promo code Caruso to get a $1 for the next 6 days. Goes to the 29th there. You're getting all the NBA data there. And of course, celebrating the glory of Alex Caruso. So make sure you're using that promo code Caruso at awesemo.com/join. Clayton asking, do you like Burks as the first man off the bench tonight? And Greg, this is something that we talked about a little bit yesterday with some guys who ended up being decent plays. Maybe Karis LeVert in particular, the one who we talked about, not very highly owned, people scared off by him coming off the bench, and he gets pretty much unencumbered usage. I do think that could be a possibility with Burks here. He's probably going to be playing alongside Emmanuel Quickly, who they have some hopes for. So maybe that's a little bit of reason to downgrade him a bit. But I actually don't think Burks is a bad play off the bench. I think, to me, one of the value guys, I might prefer Delon Wright a little bit. But how are you feeling about Alec Burks?
So here's the difference is, even though the Knicks is a totally different roster, different coach in Tom Thibodeau, if we look at how Tibbs has run his rotations historically, he runs his starters out on the court for like 40 minutes and doesn't like to go to his bench all that often. So the difference with somebody like Karis LeVert is we kind of knew the Nets were going to play a deepish rotation. We knew that Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant weren't going to be pushed to play 40 minutes in the first game of the season. Thibodeau has none of those reserves. He will run his starters into the ground over the course of the season. So I downgraded Burks in a pretty significant way when he came off the bench. I liked him a ton as a starter. I thought he made for a great contrarian option. But now that he's coming off the bench, I had to downgrade him a lot, and I have him like 3% or something like that. So not very much exposure to him for me. I would have liked him a lot in the Tibbs lineup if he was starting. It's just really hard for me to trust Thibodeau players coming off the bench.
No, I think that's fair. Maybe a little bit of a change in approach. You could make that gamble, but historically, definitely he has gone the other way with guys, famously playing upwards of 35 minutes in a way. It's much more consistent than some of the other teams out there. So definitely something to be mindful of. And I just feel like Burks, even if these guys do play extended minutes, and I do think Awesemo's projections for the most part, his stat projections do have the minutes accounted for a special Thibodeau boost. But if Burks, to me, I think there's still a pathway for him to get to mid-20s, and it's just a matter of what he does there. He's always been a productive, permanent guy. So I'm probably a little more bullish on Burks than Greg is for that super chat. Checking the premium Slack real fast, see if we got anything good in here. No, just people arguing. Some lineups out there. Nothing too surprising, it seems like. For the Grizzlies, we have Ja, Dylan Brooks, Allen Anderson and Valanciunas. I'm actually curious your thoughts on these Grizzlies, Greg, because we talked about John Morant, but I think the sneakiest player, maybe it's not even that sneaky anymore, Dylan Brooks and Kyle Anderson too. I think two guys who are benefiting from Ja just being better, really taking the leap here in his second year and being able to distribute the ball. Brooks actually shot the ball well in preseason, which I know is preseason, but he's been a relentless gunner in the past. And if he can actually shoot like he's supposed to shoot, which has historically been a little better, I do think he's an interesting guy. And as is Kyle Anderson, no Jaren Jackson here for at least the early part of the year. Anderson been a little more productive, a little more aggressive finding his shot, at least in the preseason. I think the Grizzlies could be kind of sneaky today. So you tell me, am I right or wrong there?
Yeah, well, I made a case for Morant earlier, and on FanDuel, Kyle Anderson is one of my higher-owned small forwards. So, I mean, the position is really thin. There's Giannis on the high end, except he's really expensive at $11,500, and we don't really have quite the same value on the slate now with the Rockets. Thunder game isn't on there. And then you go all the way down, there's Jimmy Butler against the Magic. That's not really a particularly great spot, so there's a really big drop-off. And it kind of left me searching for value at the small forward position. One of the plays, Larry Nance, makes a lot of sense. But then in lineups without him, I end up getting to a lot of Kyle Anderson. Because like you said, starting now that Jaren Jackson's out for probably like a quarter of the season, maybe longer after undergoing knee surgery. And also, I mean, you look at the price point, I'm $3,800. So that's nearly min price on FanDuel for a guy who's been an okay fantasy producer at times, is probably looking at over 30 minutes in a starting role for the Grizzlies and in a plus matchup against the Spurs. The Spurs are one of the worst defenses in the league last year. So I think that Kyle Anderson is one of the better value plays at the small forward position on FanDuel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm playing him on DraftKings. On FanDuel, the price is even better. So I agree. I think that getting a little more Kyle Anderson than you might feel comfortable with might be a good move, because he's always been a guy who contribute with the rebounding and the assists and also some defensive stats. And if he starts shooting a little bit more, you could see a bit of an uptick. And I just think this team is going to rise a bit with Ja being able to push the pace and being able to set guys up. And if Dylan Brooks and really Kyle Anderson, both guys, but definitely Brooks to me, I think a guy I want a lot of. We got a question here from Seth in the premium Slack asking about Lonnie Walker, another cheap guy who people, I guess, are curious about. I don't necessarily ever love Lonnie Walker unless we have a lot of guys out. I guess I could see the concept with DeJounte Murray expected to have some ownership. DeMar DeRozan looks decently popular, but the only Spur I got an appreciable amount of, I guess two. I got a good amount of Murray and a good amount of Aldridge. I don't see the reason to go to Walker with all those guys in the lineup. But Greg, do you feel differently?
I don't have exposure to Lonnie Walker. One other Spurs player that I have exposure to is DeMar DeRozan, but I don't have exposure to Lonnie Walker today. I think that's digging a little bit too deep. Honestly, where there's this many games, I don't necessarily think we have to go to a guy who's like a fringe player for the Spurs.
Yeah, I mean, I would take the aforementioned Kyle Anderson at that price point. I would probably, let's see what else I would take. I would also honestly go Dante DiVincenzo at that price point. There's at least some more opportunity in that Milwaukee offense, and Dante should be seeing minutes this year, only 4K flat on DraftKings. So yeah, Lonnie, not a guy for me. Dev Rose, one of our guys also in the premium Slack, asking thoughts on Vassell for 3K. He was pretty good in the preseason, but another case here where I just feel like a full rotation minutes here for Aldridge and DeRozan and DeJounte Murray, probably a bit of a squeeze on Vassell, but he's probably, I guess, the most logical pivot to that Patrick Robinson chalk if you really want to go there. I'm not going there, Greg. How do you feel about Vassell?
Yeah, I didn't roster him either. This is another case where it's just, I don't think there's a need to dig that deep to go to, a guy who's, we don't really know what his role is going to be or how significant it's going to be. Let's see, what do we have him? We have him projected for 15 fantasy points, which in general is fair for the price point, but not on a slate that's this big, right? You don't have to dig that deep. And the other thing too is, like you said before, you don't have to play somebody who's the flat minimum just because there is a guy in Patrick Williams who's popular at that price. It's okay to spend up a little bit and go to somebody who's, even if like a Wendell Carter 4,400, Killian Hayes at 3,900. Those are the types of value plays I'm more comfortable with than just jamming in a 3K guy for the sake of having a 3K guy.
Speaking of, I think you can just repeat that, or whoever this person is, Schrickstein in the premium Slack, just replay what Greg just said, but he's asking Javonte Green or John Conchar on FanDuel. If this were a preseason slate, actually on FanDuel, you still probably wouldn't have played these guys. But I don't see the need to go to either guy. This is not the time for the Javonte Greens and John Conchars of the world, unless you disagree, Greg.
No, I don't. This feels almost like last night I had like a decent amount of exposure to Taylor Horton Tucker. And these are the types of guys you roster on a 2-game slate, right? You're just trying to find somebody who's a bench guy that could fall into minutes and have upside. But that's the difference between playing a 2-game slate and now used to be a 13, now a 12-game NBA slate. There are so many viable options that you only need to make a player pool of guys who it's like, I know this guy is a good value play. I know this guy is going to get X amount of minutes. I know this guy is somewhat productive of an NBA player. There's no need to go to an end of bench or kind of fringe rotation type guy where, number one, you're not really confident what his points per minute production is going to be. And number two, you're not even confident what the actual minutes are going to be for him to produce those points per minute. So I think that we're digging too deep if you're looking at somebody like John Concher.
Yeah, and to be clear, like guys like John Conchar and even Javonte Green always overproject a little bit for me because of the way that I run my data, leaning on the Awesemo minutes and all that stuff. And, I just don't see the reason to go there. Like we talked about it. We'll probably have to talk about it a few more times here because of the questions we're getting, but just pay up a little more, pay for the guys, have very secure roles who are going to have a shot to close. That's something that ShipMyMoney that Adam always says is like, you want ideally your guy to have a chance to be in that closing group to make sure that, he's going to have the minutes to get there. And he's also running hot enough that he does get there. And to me, that's neither of those guys are ones who have really a pathway to getting more minutes. Whereas some of the guys we've talked about maybe do a bit more. Make sure you guys hit that like button, by the way, and also subscribe. We're going to have content coming out throughout the holidays as well. I know there's a happy hour going on, a happy hour strategy show at 11 a.m. The odd time for a happy hour, Greg. I feel like I respect that, but that's socially seems odd.
Not in this industry. Like what's odd in this? What's odd in this industry? We're sitting on couch. I'm sitting on a pink fuzzy chair talking about basketball and games that were canceled because the team didn't have enough players to show up. That's what ended up happening with the Rockets. Which I don't understand. I would figure they have to forfeit, right? They don't have enough players for the game. Those are rec league rules. You don't have enough players, you forfeit.
I wanted that game so bad. I was going to smash Sterling Brown and tout the hell out of Al Horford. It was going to be a great show. I'm very tilted about that game not existing tonight.
So I want to address a question. Steelers 555 in our premium chat. He asked, are you making more balanced builds now that we don't have the Rockets and the Thunder game for value? I think that's kind of the point of reference there. And to me, it's yes, because I couldn't have been more stars and scrubs before this news came out. Like I was just going to have a million of the value plays in that game, just load up on them and then jam Doncic and Giannis and Drummond into all my lineups. But that's not really an option anymore. So just by necessity, yes, I'm way more balanced now because we just don't have the access to the same amount of value plays.
We also got a couple starting lineups in from our news god, El Negro Loco. It is Tyler Harrow starting for the Heat alongside Duncan Robinson, Jimmy Butler. Actually, there's no name on the power forward. I think that's Mo Harkless. I'm going to assume it's Mo Harkless and Bam Adebayo. Not Goran Dragic. So if you were expecting Dragic to get back in there in the starting lineup, it is going to be Tyler Harrow going forward. And then also the Wizards starters are Russell Westbrook, Bradley Beal, Denny Avdija. I have not had to say that name out loud, Greg. Do you want to tackle it?
So I have gotten trashed all preseason for saying his name wrong, and I'm almost positive it's Denny Avdija.
Avdija? Okay, so he's Israeli, right? I feel like I don't know enough about Israeli accenting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know his background. I don't know where he was born. I don't know. I don't know that much about him. I just watched a YouTube video where somebody said his name. I was like, this is what I'm going with now. I wasn't like, what's his religion? How old are his parents? Like I didn't look into any of that.
We also have Isaac Bonga starting at the 4. So that's one thing that could be a little bit different than expected with Davis Bertans, I think on a minutes limit of 20 minutes today. So a little bit of a low usage lineup here. So if you are, thinking about playing Westbrook, I play a little more Westbrook than I was probably comfortable with, or Bradley Beal, who I think you can make a little bit less of a case for. Just I want to see how it works out with him on his end of things with Westbrook. There's going to be nobody who really shoots in this group, in the starting group at least. Maybe Thomas Bryant a little bit, but question here from Pedrito PR asking about Tobias Harris on FanDuel. And Greg, I actually think Tobias Harris on both sites is one of the most mispriced guys today, where you expect him to get into the mid 30s minutes. You expect him to have some decent results. And I like the price on Tobias actually quite a bit, especially now without having Horford in that 4 hole in the power forward spot. So to me, Harris is one of the stronger players on the slate. How are you feeling about him?
Yeah, so here's the things to like about Tobias Harris. I think the Sixers really made really good additions by subtraction in their lineup, because by getting rid of Al Horford and Josh Richardson, I think they were able to offload players who didn't really fit, and they were able to add shooters like Danny Green, who I know that generally Twitter just thinks he's the worst player to ever exist and play basketball, but adding guys like Danny Green and Seth Curry are much better fits to the Sixers offense than guys like Josh Richardson and Al Horford, and that's going to benefit Tobias Harris in a couple of ways. Number one, there's more usage. That's the obvious way. But then number two, there's so much more floor spacing in the offense now that they've added extra shooters that I think Simmons, Embiid, Tobias Harris, all of these guys should find more success on the more shot attempts they're going to get.
Also, the Hawks starting lineup is out, and maybe one somewhat surprising change here. I guess actually maybe two with DeAndre Hunter moving back in, but it's Trae Young, Cam Reddish, DeAndre Hunter, John Collins, and Gallo starting. So no Bojan Bogdanovic, but I'm kind of surprised by this lineup, Greg, but any feel here? I feel like this kind of makes this grouping a little bit uglier where Gallo's going to take enough shots, but we saw last year, especially with the Thunder, this is a guy who never spikes a big upside in a meaningful way. I don't love this lineup actually, and I'm going to try to mute some of my Trae Young and Hawks because I don't love how this is looking.
So I think John Collins is the best play of the group just because he's the guy who's probably going to get a lot of rebounds and pick up defensive stats. I think that he benefits from Clint Capella not being there. And it's hard to say because we've never seen him play alongside Clint Capella. So we don't know what that grouping looks like. But if you look at him paired in the front court with somebody like Danilo Gallinari, it stands to reason that Collins is going to get a bunch of rebounds. But beyond that, to your point on Trae Young, I agree. I don't think he's a particularly strong play. I understand the upsides there, but I didn't get to him. And you have to be concerned about the usage in this kind of lineup. That's a lot of guys who shoot the ball, especially with Gallo coming in for Clint Capella.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could make the argument for Bogdanovic, like we talked about, where he's going to probably get a little more lead ball handler time in that second unit. So no Rondo, he's still in the COVID protocol. So I would think that's the reason why, and maybe it doesn't hurt Bogdanovic. But overall, that grouping, I do think for Trae Young, it doesn't strike me as the kind of spot that you want to see him at because, he kind of needs especially at his price, like he needs to really be dominating the ball and not, just letting Gallo chuck up shots, letting Cam Reddish find himself, DeAndre Hunter, whatever he does out there. I think there's some cause for concern if you're playing a lot of Trae Young tonight. Let's see what else we got here. Anything good? Moses Guthrie asking, is TJ Warren going under the radar? I think the thing with TJ Warren that people maybe just don't remember with the bubble, like he was amazing, but also there was no Domantas Sabonis out there, who's a guy who does take a lot of production away. I just don't think Warren's worth a lot of exposure here. And I think it's worth actually putting out the caveat. Like, I don't expect the same TJ Warren out there with this team and a new coach as well. Like there's a lot of variables here where I don't think benefit TJ Warren having that bubble MVP upside.
Yeah, so the other thing, too, is I'm really concerned whenever a player has a plantar fascia injury. That's an injury that's just been known to be one that lingers for a really long time and causes issues. So it's a concern enough. TJ Warren was questionable to play in this game with a plantar fascia injury. It's the same exact injury that he missed the game with in August. So he's been dealing with this for how long ago is August? What month of the year is it? Yeah, so he's been doing this for months now, right? He's been dealing with this for 4 months. This has been an injury for him. So when you consider that he missed the game 4 months ago with a foot injury, had all this time off, not practicing, not playing, didn't play at all in the preseason, and now the season comes around, he's questionable with that same injury. That's a big concern for me. Even though he's active, I don't necessarily feel confident that he's going to play his normal minutes. And to your point also about Domantas Sabonis, the usage isn't going to probably be there that it was before. And there's no way that he's going to be as efficient as he was in the bubble, where he's just like, TJ Warren, 70% 3-point shooter. That's the norm for him. So I think there's a lot of things working against him that didn't have me getting him into my lineups.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a tournament play you could make a little bit of, but not a core guy. You're, especially this time of year, and that's sort of why, I guess to kind of take it back to the game that doesn't exist on the slate now, that Thunder team and Houston as well, like you want to find the teams that have some vacant opportunity that's left behind. And, I think you get the Pistons. That's sort of why you go to Killian Hayes. He'll be playing 30 minutes. Like that's one spot there. Guys who lost some teammates that had a high usage rate. Again, like the Wizards would be one where you have a guy coming in with a high usage rate. Like you're sort of thinking about it as like a balancing act. And I do think that that's one thing to keep in mind here, especially not going to guys who, have a worse position than they had previously, especially if their price reflects like hot TJ Warren. Like he's not 8K like he was at points in the bubble, but he's still priced up a bit because people, have that crush on him for having that good run that he had. A question in the Slack here from Jesse GM, and is there a total ownership percentage threshold for taking down GPPs in NBA DFS? We got a lot of new people signing up here with the Caruso package. So I think it's worth pointing out here, watching Alex's game plan videos is very helpful. Watching some of Josh's process videos is going to help you understand it better, but really not something where you're trying to find an ownership number that I think it's 150 ownership product on Fantasy Cruncher. I can't go there. It's more like you have one guy who's under 10%. You have two guys under 20%. Like it's more about the ownership product where if you were to put it all together, I don't know, Greg, if you have any sort of 30-second elevator pitch here about ownership, or 30-minute if you want to do a full TED talk on it.
I would, except I think it'd get really boring because I'd be stretching just to make the minutes and fill content. Because I've had to do that from my days doing stand-up where it'd be like, you're doing a 10-minute set. And then someone would be like, and somebody would yell like, hey, so-and-so isn't showing up, so just spend another 30 minutes on stage. It's like, well, I don't have that much material, but I'll fill the time. So yeah, you probably don't want me talking about the ownership for 30 minutes, but yeah, I'll talk about it for 30 seconds. That'll be a little more appropriate. So I don't think it's nearly as big of a deal in basketball as it is in other sports. The reason being is there are a lot of cheap plays in basketball that are much safer than they are in other sports, right? So there could be a min-priced wide receiver in football who there's a lot of variance to football in general. Whereas basketball, if there's a min-priced point guard or something like that, or a min-priced center that's going to be starting and playing 30 plus minutes, the chance of them failing is generally pretty low. So I end up getting a bunch of exposure to them. Eric Pascal, for example, there was a guy who was really safe last night and I thought didn't have a good chance of failing. So it isn't foolproof. It happens from time to time. But I think yesterday, if I remember our projections correctly, we ended up having with like a 78% chance of landing in the optimal lineup. And it just happened to fall in that 22% range of outcomes. But the point being is that the chance of somebody who's cheap having a good game and returning good value in NBA DFS is much safer than a value play in any other sport. So I don't mind rostering a bunch of really chalky guys if it's a guy who I think is appropriate chalk.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of why, for Luka on a tournament or on a slate of this size, like I normally be like, I would like to get away from Luka, but just, structurally looking at Awesemo's projections, looking at my own data, like I feel pretty confident that Luka's a guy I want to get to because I think his outcome is going to be, he's going to get there to where he needs to get to in terms of a target score more often than the 33% he'll be owned. That said, you could certainly play the Damian Lillards. You can go away from it a little bit, but it's sort of, what's your appetite there? How often do you think every player is going to have the outcome that you want? And that's really the defining trait of ownership. And that's why you should have more of guys that you really believe in. Let's see, any other good questions here? Yeah, keep going. Sticking with Jesse GM and use the boom bust tool. It's another thing there where Awesemo runs some sims. One of the big board, I think, is a helpful new feature for the NBA season, which you get at awesemo.com/join and use that promo code Caruso, $1 for all the access to all the NBA data through the 29th. Anybody else, Greg, you're getting an appreciable amount here? Because I feel like we can sort of, bask in some of these other guys in the higher price points. You can make the arguments for, I'm getting a little too many Spurs. I think that's one situation. I talked about the Grizzlies. I think Fred VanVleet is a little bit overlooked here. What are you getting in a big way that maybe the rest of the field isn't?
I have a decent amount of Hassan Whiteside now, not like a crazy amount, because I think that a lot of the guys that we've already talked about are the players that I really have a core amount of exposure to, but I'm overweight to Hassan Whiteside. I think he's really interesting from a standpoint of he's such a good fantasy producer. I don't know if there's a bigger gap between anybody in the NBA in terms of their actual real life talent and their DFS talent, because Hassan Whiteside's a guy who signed for a minimum price tag with Hassan Whiteside and was one of the better fantasy producers in the entire league last year, and then just had no market for him as a free agent. So what's difficult about Whiteside is we don't know exactly what his role is going to be with the Kings. But if he does end up playing and starting and getting, 28 to 30 minutes, he's ridiculously too cheap at the 3,800 price tag.
Yeah, I think the concern for me is just that, if you have him with a 22-minute projection, which Awesemo's numbers have the most recent run that I pulled in, I think he does look pretty good. The question is really, do we see more Rashawn Holmes? Do we see, does it get to maybe 18 minutes for Whiteside? Because that's sort of the concern there. But I agree, like he's worth the stabs, another cheap guy. And like Greg talked about before, the point guards, the centers, the guys who have really the most predictable per minute production. That's one reason that maybe he can get a little more Whiteside, just 10% projected ownership for him. Got a super chat.
One more thing I wanted to add on Whiteside before we hit the before we hit the super chat is, so with Whiteside, there's a range of outcomes with his minutes, and there are for a lot of these players on the first. This is the first time we've seen the rotations for a lot of these teams. We're largely guessing what the playing time is going to be for a lot of these players. We have no data. We have no sample size. Hassan Whiteside's on a new team. Rashawn Holmes is hurt for a lot of last year. Marvin Bagley was hurt for a lot of last year. So yeah, it's possible that Whiteside only plays 16 minutes. It's also possible he plays 28. And I think those are the types of guys who are really good points per minute producers. He's cheap. He has no ownership. So you could see how there's a chance for him to break the slate with the kind of upside he has at his price point. So I'm less concerned about the downside in GPPs, and I'm more looking at the upside.
No, I think that's reasonable. And, there's never, for whatever faults you can have about Hassan Whiteside, and there are many if you are a fan of, quality basketball playing and winning at basketball games and trying on a basketball court, Hassan won't bring you those. But in terms of per minute fantasy production, that's where Whiteside can maybe have some value at a shockingly cheap price today. Let's see here. So the super chat that we had, another cheap center, Sam French, wants to ask about Boban. He says, in Hulk voice, Boban smash Slate. I'm not going to do I don't want to do that voice. I like doing the kidnapper yesterday with you, Greg, but I don't know about the Hulk voice.
You don't? What about the Lou Ferrigno voice?
Boban smash. I think that's not. I'm not there. I'm not with it all the way. But I think the issue with any Boban slate, we do have Dwight Powell back in the mix. That is a cause for concern, I would say, generally for the center minutes there. But they just don't want to play Boban. Like, that's always the thing, is that they'll play Boban in desperate times, but is playing against Phoenix, playing against DeAndre Ayton really where you want to play Boban? I don't know. So it would not be a Boban smash slate to me. I'd rather go to a guy like Whiteside or Mason Plumlee. But Greg, do you have any Boban exposure? I feel like there's been a lot of Boban chat for a guy who you can never trust to actually see the court.
Yeah, and here's the other thing with Boban. Not only, I have no interest in him. I have zero lineups. Didn't even think about making lineups with Boban. I didn't think about making lineups with Boban. But here's the other thing also. He's 4,800. It's not like we're getting 3,000 Boban and hoping that he plays 12 minutes or something like that. He's priced at 4,800, and Alex doesn't project to play 3 minutes tonight. And that might be too high because I don't have a whole lot of confidence that he's going to be in the rotation, especially now that Dwight Powell's back from his Achilles injury. So, I mean, we see Boban come in and play very well from time to time, but this is not even close to being the spot with this many games and options on the slate.
Yeah, like find more money to go to the Whitesides or the Mason Plumlees. Find even more money, go to Wendell Carter and take some of the chalk there.
He costs $1,000 more than Whiteside.
Wait, does he actually? Jesus, yeah, no. Then play any of this. I just kind of assumed he must be like around the flat minimum because I haven't seen his number anywhere. But no, that's not the time to play Boban. You play him when he's minimum priced and he hasn't played in months, and you're like, oh, Dallas might get blown out today. Like, that's when you play Boban.
Yeah, and even then, it's kind of questionable a lot of the time.
And even then, it'll be like a Maxi Kleber day, and you're like, oh, cool. Like, I'm glad I did that. What does Whiteside play? Like, what position he's a center? If you don't know the position that Hassan Whiteside plays, you should get that Awesemo Plus membership at awesemo.com/join, where all the position data is right there for you.
I think he would like to be a point guard. Do you remember his first falling out in Miami was when Eric Spoelstra just wouldn't let him launch threes in games? He was, and they got into an argument about it in practice, and Whiteside just started moping everywhere. And they're like, "All right, well, if you insist on shooting threes and bringing the ball up, we're just not going to play you." So maybe that's actually Hassan Whiteside in the chat being like, "Tell me, what position am I? Well, I'm a point guard, right? I'm a point guard."
What I don't even know, honestly. Like, Whiteside is just such an incredible character here who I will always play if you know he's going to get minutes. And I think that's sort of the dichotomy. You don't have to love these guys as actual real life players as long as they'll give you a rebound a minute. And that's what Whiteside will certainly do. Let's see, any other good questions in the Slack? Is Nance negatively correlated with Drummond? Thinking of taking both on FanDuel? I mean, I would think so. I'm not playing much Nance. I know, Greg, you had a little more interest there, but did you play Nance in your lineups where you also had Drummond?
Yeah, I have some lineups with them together, and I also have. Let me pull this up really quick. I have some lineups that are mini stacks of that game where it's Nance and Drummond with like Rozier and Hayward, or with Rozier and Graham or something like that, because I don't think that's a bad game to target. And the other thing too is, even if players are negatively correlated sometimes, it's not a big deal depending on price. So Larry Nance on FanDuel is priced at 5,100, which is really cheap, because if you looked at his numbers as a starter last year, he's somebody who should be priced over 7,000. And then if you look at Andre Drummond also, he's somebody who should probably be priced over 10,000. So when you think about the negative correlation, it's not a big deal when both of the guys are underpriced by like $3,000 and $2,000.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Trying to see if there's anything else good question-wise. Also, guys, make sure you're paying attention to the News God posts in the premium Slack, also the News God blog, our live blog on Awesemo's homepage, because that's a good way to see all the news as well. I feel like that's tough for people to keep up sometimes, especially with some of the COVID items out there. Thankfully, we knew the Houston OKC news in advance, but News God, our boy El Negro Loco, does about as good of a job as anybody out there keeping track of all the news. So follow that content if you can. Let's see. There's after Luka, who are the core plays on DK? Anthony asks, and we don't normally talk about core plays. I think especially on a slate like this one where you can make a lot of arguments, but some of the highest owned plays. Actually, let's play a little game here, Greg. Out of the highest owned 5 plays, which are on DraftKings, this is a freebie for you guys. You get the rest of the data at awesemo.com/join and use that promo code Caruso for the $1 deal. But top 5 owned guys on DraftKings: Luka Doncic, Wendell Carter, Andre Drummond, Patrick Williams, and Lowry Markkinen. All these guys above 23%. Doncic, the top guy, at 33%. Which of them, if you had to fade one, which would it be?
Patrick Williams. And I mean, it's not that you can't play him, but I have less exposure to him than the field. And I think also that we just don't know what he is, right? This is his first NBA game, and we're just seeing a min-price rookie, and everybody's like, hey, I want a bunch of exposure to Patrick Williams. For all we know, he'll get outplayed by Otto Porter, and Otto Porter will end up closing the game and play the bulk of the minutes. So I think there's enough uncertainty with Patrick Williams that I don't necessarily want to roster him. And now I'm going to juxtapose that with what I said earlier about Hassan Whiteside, because I also said I like Hassan Whiteside because there's an unknown factor there. But here's the difference. There's an unknown factor, except Hassan Whiteside is very low ownership with upside and also downside. Patrick Williams is an unknown with probably moderate upside and a lot of downside, but he has a lot of ownership. So I'd be more willing to take a chance on a high variance upside play with low ownership than a high variance upside play with high ownership, because I'd rather hit on the low ownership's upside and try to fade the potential downside of a high ownership play, if that makes sense. Did I explain that properly?
No, I think I'm with you on that. And yeah, it's just more about if everybody's on this guy who's going to be 25% owned, but he's got a 25% chance of getting where he's supposed to, like that guy's probably, hey, you could say appropriately owned, but maybe a little bit over owned. Whereas you have a guy who's 1% owned, but has a 20% chance, like he's not as good of a play, but there's less people there and a similar enough outcome that makes it worthwhile. There was one question which I just lost, and
I had one that I got tagged on that I'll read out right now. So we have Fat James Harden in our Slack chat. He wants to know Bledsoe or Graham, and then Sabonis or Collins. So I could read off who I have more exposure to. I think that's the easiest way to do it. I have more exposure to Bledsoe than I do to Graham, so I prefer Bledsoe. And then Sabonis versus Collins, I have more exposure to Sabonis than I do to John Collins. I think people are sleeping a little bit on how good Domantas Sabonis was from a fantasy perspective last year. And it makes sense because he's so far out of sight, out of mind. People haven't seen Sabonis play basketball in almost a year now, but he crushed for the Pacers last year. So I like him a lot, and 7,800 is too cheap for him. He was, let's see, what was he priced at last year? I mean, yeah, he was a guy who was almost always priced over 8,000, as high as over 9,000. So the 7,800 price tag for him on FanDuel is cheaper than what I think his baseline should be.
I was going to play because we did it for DraftKings. I feel like it's only fair to do the top 5 owned for FanDuel, especially only a few minutes left to lock here. So Greg, same game here. Fade one of the top 5 guys. Terry Rozier is going to be the top owned play on FanDuel. Nice price on him. So it is a different equation, very different equation today on FanDuel compared to DraftKings. Larry Nance, John Collins, Zach Levine, Daniel Tice, all these guys over 24% projected ownership. If you had to fade one, which would it be?
So it's going to be John Collins for me because I'm underweight to the field on him. I think there's very good pivots at his price point. One who I just mentioned, Domantas Sabonis, who has less ownership. He is only $100 more than Sabonis. Sabonis only $100 more than John Collins. And then we have Zion Williamson at the same exact price as John Collins, projecting for less ownership. And to me, I think that's pretty crazy because the upside on Zion is so crazy this year. Like, would you be surprised at all to see him be priced over 10,000 in like 3 weeks time?
No, I mean, given his per minute numbers and the fact that they're dedicated to playing him a lot, like, yeah, Zion, I'm a little worried because Zion didn't pop up a lot for me on a pure projection basis, but I agree. Like, he definitely is one of the guys who jump out as like his price will probably be much higher, shorter, like sooner than later.
And his minutes in the preseason, 33 and 34 in 2 preseason games. Zion's going to play a ton this year. I understand that people look at Zion and just like, oh, he's fat, he's injury prone, he's a bust and all that, because people just make wild assumptions based on whatever they see the first time they saw somebody play. And I oddly think that Zion still gets knocked just based on the fact that he didn't play well in his first quarter of his first NBA game. And people were so quick to jump to Zion being fat jokes and saying Zion's a bust. And they just never really adjusted their opinion on him. And he was really frustrating in the bubble, the way they just didn't give him extended minutes and that the Pelicans didn't really push for the playoffs. But Zion, to me, is somebody who's going way overlooked on this slate. And I think that he could really crush. It's a tough matchup against the Raptors, but I think that the talent is there, and he should be one of the best points per minute fantasy producers in the entire league this season.
Yeah, and he has the upside to get over 50 fantasy points, and not going to have as much ownership as he probably would have had in those early days where he debuted. I'm curious what Zion's ownership is at in our most recent run, because 10% for Zion does seem pretty reasonable, all things considered. I feel like I got a little more Ingram, which never feels great, and that's sort of probably the reason why I didn't get there a bunch, is because Ingram, Zion, we also have Bledsoe in the mix now. Like, there's enough guys there taking time away that I worry a little bit about Zion being able to get to that ceiling, but at that low ownership, he's probably worth some exposure for sure.
Yeah, especially when he's the same exact price as a chalky John Collins. I think there's really good pivots off John Collins. Zion is criminally overlooked, and the other one being Sabonis, like I said. So that would be my fade in that price point. I think there's other guys to go to that make sense.
IMAX in the YouTube chat, and I'll jump back to the premium Slack. So if you have your questions on really either platform, get them in now. We're taking a look at them here since we kind of established the core parts. The question here on YouTube: would you go Whiteside over Mitchell Robinson? Two different price points, but I think an interesting question here. Mitchell, if we're going by the Thibodeau corollary, you could expect Mitchell maybe to get more run here. Kind of a surprise, I guess, that he is the nominal starter over Nerlens Noel. Only 1% ownership. That said, to me, Whiteside projects to be more likely to get to where you need him to get for a tournament more likely or more frequently. So I would go Whiteside and take the savings and use them elsewhere. But Greg, how do you feel there? I assume your team Whiteside as well.
Yeah, I have more exposure to Whiteside, so I am obligated to say him. And I definitely think that Mitchell Robinson is interesting from a standpoint of, number one, I think he's an actual very good basketball player, particularly on the defensive end. The one thing that you have to be concerned about with him, though, is number one, they didn't start him in the preseason, so it kind of seems like they're experimenting a little bit at the center position. And then number two, he's somebody who could pick up 3 fouls 2 minutes into the game and just blow up an entire lineup that quickly. So I find it hard to go with too much exposure to Mitchell Robinson just because of the foul risk.
Well, I'm surprised. So the premium Slack, one thing that our pal Josh Engelman, the Chubster, Greg and I both do shows with together and separately, we enjoy his company so much. His number 3 most exposed guy, I think, on FanDuel is Patrick Williams. So he's buying in.
He's also, here's the difference though. Patrick Williams is not very popular on FanDuel, whereas he is very popular on DraftKings. So I do think there's a little bit of a difference rostering him across 2 different sites.
Yeah, that's fair. Also, Bojan popping up for Josh, which makes me feel a little better here because I too got a stupid amount of Bojan. IRL Lane saying ignored the YouTube super chat and now here. I didn't see you post a super chat, but he's asking about Cat. I do think Cat's one of the guys that I forced my way to a little bit more than the field. Him as well as Joel Embiid, I feel like are guys that I wanted to get to a little bit more just because they do have that slate breaking upside. But Greg, how do you feel about Cat, where he's 10% projected own, kind of like Zion, but the price is high enough where I'd rather find the money to go to Luka personally, but maybe you disagree.
Yeah, so he was asking Towns versus Giannis, which I assume is for his last spot in his cash lineup, and that's just easily Giannis for me.
Yeah, I think as long as the rest of the lineup isn't pure chalk, Giannis will be probably about twice his own. But yeah, I would definitely want to go Giannis over Towns. That's I think a safer play and probably a higher upside play at the same time.
Yeah, and I have significantly more exposure to Giannis than I do to Towns.
And no surprise with the Pelicans starting lineup that just came in: Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Steven Adams, Zion, and Eric Bledsoe rounding out that group of 5 there. Let's see, anything else good here? Fantasy Wiz asking thoughts on a pivot to Teague over Hayes. I just don't trust the minutes or the usage for Jeff Teague, though I do see him being projection-wise viable. You can do it. I personally would prefer Hayes because his ownership actually hasn't spiked a bunch. But Greg, how would you do there? Would you take the Hayes and a little bit more ownership, or want to go down to old Jeff Teague?
Teague has really sucked when coming off the bench over the last couple of years. He's had some decent games where he's starting, except he's somebody who's dropped off in a pretty significant way over the last couple of years. He used to be, a pretty solid to above average starter, and he's just not that player anymore. And I also get with the Celtics, Kemba Walker's out, so there's more of a role for Jeff Teague. But even so, it's a really tough matchup against the Bucks. They were, I think, either led the league in defensive efficiency or near the top of the league in defensive efficiency last year. And then the other thing also is I just don't think that Teague is going to be a guy who's going to get a ton of touches and take a lot of shots in the offense. I still think that it's going to be Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown getting a lot of the shots there. So I am not on Jeff Teague at all today.
Yeah, I don't need to personally get there. I just feel a little more confident in Hayes' ability to kind of contribute across a bunch of categories. And Teague, very easy to get lost in all the usage that's going to go to guys like Brown, especially Tatum. But maybe there's enough for Teague to get there. Just not a preferred play for me by any stretch. Let's see any other good questions here. Checking the YouTube chat as well. Apparently, your old pal Emac disagrees and is more of a Towns truther than you are.
What is he? I don't know what it is he's disagreeing with.
He's fading nerd ass Greg because he loves Towns.
Okay. I have some exposure to Towns on FanDuel. I don't on DraftKings though. But also you have to think about the question there, Emac. He's asking who's a better play for his cash lineup, Karl-Anthony Towns or Giannis Antetokounmpo. I mean, come on, it's Giannis, our old pal Emac.
Sometimes you got to put your old pal in line when he starts mouthing off in the chat, and that's how it is. He's got a little too lippy for his
got an old yeller, that old man.
Oh, maybe on one of the streams on the weekend. That'll be coming up. I got a minute left here to lock, guys. Get those lineups in. Also hit that like button. We haven't pandered enough for likes today because it's a 13 gamer. We had so much to talk about, but make sure you hit that like button whenever you're watching an Awesemo video, but especially now for Greg and myself. And we are locked, guys. So Greg, any plugs here for you? Any final regrets? Really anything you want to put out into the universe before we go into the holidays?
No, just happy holidays, everybody. And don't forget also, check out that promo code Caruso. Just $1, you get access to our NBA package for the first week of the season. There's no better deal than that if you're a new Awesemo customer, never used it before, and just want to check out what we're all about. I think it'll really speak for itself. We don't really have to sell it all that hard. It's only $1. So come check it out. Get access to our projections, ownership projections, boom bust tool, which I've been using a lot, all the above. And it's only $1. So there's no real cost there.
Yeah, so check out some of the content here too. We will have streams coming up Christmas Day. I think actually Greg, that's you and Josh, right? Christmas?
Yeah, I'm doing something Christmas. I'm off on Christmas Eve, which I even said I would work on Christmas Eve, and then Noah was like, no, we're giving you the day off.
Yes, that's fun. So we will have people here for you guys over the next few days. Check out my Twitter tonight. I'm doing our Splash Play holiday show with Peter Overs that we'll be having some special guests and getting all sorts of lit on there. But we appreciate you guys. If we don't see you before then, have a happy and safe holiday. If you're seeing family, whatever, just be smart about everything. And good luck tonight, guys. We'll see you guys again soon. Peace. Langston Galloway? What? Okay. Jordan, you're taking some weird stances, man.